Hey there, curious minds. Tonight we're diving deep into the golden shadows of a world few people know existed. Picture this, you're standing on the worn clay of an Ashanti market, sometime around the 1700s. It's late. The sun's bowed out, and the air is thick with wood smoke, sweat, and the sweet scent of fermented palm wine. You hear distant drumming. Not festival loud, just that steady heartbeat the forest never stops playing. Torches flicker on poles, casting long insect-thin shadows as traders shift sacks, nod toward bowls, or quietly argue over weights you can barely see. Gold isn't blinding here. It doesn't dangle from necks or sit atop velvet cushions. It's dust, soft, fine, and terrifyingly easy to misplace. And tonight, you're going to walk into the lives of the men and women who kept that gold flowing, trickling through society like sand through a dream catcher. Quick favor, before you dive into full-on relaxation mode, consider liking and subscribing. It helps more than you know, and I genuinely appreciate it if you do. If not, no worries. I'm just glad you're here. If you're tuning in from somewhere special tonight, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far our sleepy caravan reaches. Wherever you are, I'm glad you're here. Let's take a moment to leave the noise of the day behind. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push through the market crowd, not like a tourist, but like someone with purpose. A trader's assistant maybe, or someone looking to make their weight in gold quite literally count. Around you, conversations flutter in twi, quick and rhythmic, punctuated with chuckles or sharp clucks of disagreement. Clay pots clink. Metal rings clatter. And you notice them, the quiet ones. Men seated behind low wooden boxes with tiny brass objects laid out in neat rows. Some shaped like crocodiles, others like stools, snakes, men with enormous heads or oversized hands. They're small, palm-sized, but everyone treats them like sacred relics. These are the gold weighers, not just glorified shopkeepers or math nerds with steady hands, though sure they were that too. They were the guardians of balance, the mediators of fairness. And yes, occasionally, the subtle cheaters if the mood or the bribe was right. Their tiny sculptures weren't decorations, they were weights. Precision-made brass counterbalances used on delicate scales to measure out gold dust. Because coins weren't a thing, and bills, not unless you count rumors. The Ashanti Empire thrived on the stuff, gold dust packed into cloth pouches, tied with sinew or string, guarded like newborns. And every transaction, every bride price, court fee, land exchange, or debt payment was handled using scales and those tiny brass weights. Which means if someone wanted to cheat you, they didn't need to draw a sword. They just needed a slightly heavier crocodile. You see a man adjust one of his weights ever so slightly, pretending to brush it off, when in reality he's palming it, replacing it with another. It's a sleight of hand move smoother than any Las Vegas magician. But here, it's ancient, practiced, and potentially deadly if caught. Dishonesty, especially with gold, wasn't just frowned upon, it could ruin you. But the lines between precision, artistry, and deception were, let's say, interpretive. As the torchlight flickers on the polished brass, you realize something odd. These weights aren't just geometric lumps or dull lumps of mass. They're beautiful and weird, and sometimes hilarious. You spot one shaped like two frogs kissing, another of a woman with 4 arms. One is a snake coiled around what appears to be a tiny drum. And here's where it gets deeper. Each one represents a proverb, a saying, a memory locked in brass, like tweets carved in metal with no character limit and zero context. Historians still argue whether the primary goal of these designs was mnemonic, mystical, or purely aesthetic. Some think they served as mnemonic devices, each one reminding the wearer of its specific mass, tied to a story or saying. Others believe they doubled as coded messages, moral reminders in a society that valued oral wisdom as much as military might. And there's always the possibility some, or just inside jokes that got wildly out of hand. You watch a transaction unfold. A woman in a bright Kent cloth lays out a small nugget of gold dust. The weigher selects a tiny figure shaped like a fish, places it on one side of the scale, and adds minute pieces of gold to the other until the beam levels. No calculators, no receipts, just muscle memory and ancestral trust, or not. A breeze cuts through the market. It smells of burning charcoal and roasted plantains. Someone nearby hums a lullaby meant more for ancestors than infants. And still, the weights gleam. One weigher tells a story, casually, while measuring a trader's payment. Something about a time when a war chief tried to pay his debt with weights forged hollow, and how he got cursed with a voice that sounded like a drum for the rest of his life. Is it true? Who knows? But in a society where storytelling and gold were both treated like sacred currency, you'd be a fool to laugh too loudly. There's a gravity to all this, not just physical, but cultural. You feel it in the way people glance sideways at unfamiliar weights, in the hush that falls when someone pulls out a set of antique scales passed down from an elder, and in the way people never, ever touch someone else's weights without permission. You pass by an older man polishing his weights with a cloth he's clearly had for decades. Each figure gets a careful rub, as if whispering secrets to them. Maybe they whisper back. Some believed the weights carried spirits, or ancestors, or messages from gods who'd rather use tiny brass leopards than burning bushes. A few even thought the weights could judge the fairness of a transaction, and would someday testify in the spirit world. And yes, occasionally someone would refuse to use a certain weight, call it cursed, blame it for a lost child or a season of bad yam harvests. And just like that, a little brass tortoise becomes public enemy number one. Superstition and trade don't cancel each other out. They waltz together, usually in matching sandals. Of course, not everyone played fair. Some weights were deliberately made heavier or lighter, filed down just enough to fool the untrained eye. And if you had enough clout or family protection, who was going to stop you? Some gold weighers were known to have secondary sets, one for regulars and one for suckers. But still, the majority held fast to an unspoken code, a balance between commerce and cosmic justice, because gold might be dust in the hand, but in Ashanti culture, it was also destiny. The dust could buy you a burial worthy of a king, or a knife in your back if you messed up the weighing. And just as the moon slides behind a drifting cloud, you notice a child watching the weigher work. Eyes wide, completely silent, probably learning the trade, or just fascinated by how much power lies in a few grams of glittering metal and a brass frog with one leg raised like it's doing yoga. Tomorrow, these same scales will be used to settle a marriage price, or measure a merchant's tax, or decide how much gold gets paid to a chief in tribute. But tonight they rest gently in their carved wooden boxes, surrounded by silent stories, smoke, and the occasional insect who mistakes a shiny leopard weight for dinner. You turn away from the market's fading murmur and follow the side path that not many bother to notice. It snakes behind the main stalls, into a quieter space, almost too quiet, really. You pass clay walls covered in years of dust and ash, and then, tucked under a thatched awning that sags just a bit in the middle, you find them. The sculptors, not loud salesmen or flamboyant storytellers, just hunched figures bathed in firelight, silently whispering life into brass. The air here smells different, less like trade, more like creation. There's beeswax bubbling in a shallow pot, crushed charcoal in bowls, metal tools laid out like surgical instruments. One, with fingers smudged in soot, is etching a faint spiral into a wax figure that looks like a bird or a gourd, or maybe both, depending on how much palm wine you've had. These are the ones behind the gold weighers, the silent artisans who make the tiny sculptures that measure the economy of empires. They don't boast or barter. They don't need to. Without them, nothing gets weighed, Nothing gets paid. You watch one of them roll a lump of wax between his palms, like he's coaxing a memory out of it. His hands know what to do even if his mouth stays closed. This is the lost wax method, used by the Ashanti for generations and then some. First, the artist sculpts the figure in beeswax. Then, it's wrapped in a fine layer of clay and baked until the wax melts out, leaving behind a hollow mold. Molten brass is poured in, the clay's cracked away, and voila! A sculpture that didn't exist a few hours ago now gleams like it's always been there. It's a process equal parts chemistry and quiet sorcery. One mainstream historical fact that even scholars agree on: this technique, called Sire Perdue in the European world, has been around in West Africa since at least the 10th century, long before the Portuguese ever thought about sticking a flag on anything. The Ashanti mastered it, refined it, and turned it into an industry of miniature marvels. But the real secret isn't just the method, it's the meaning packed into every piece. Because here's the thing, these sculptors don't just make objects, they encode ideas. A crocodile might mean the ruler is dangerous but necessary. A bird looking backward could whisper, "Remember your past." A pair of intertwined snakes. Maybe it's about diplomacy. Maybe it's about betrayal. Historians still argue whether each weight had a fixed message or if meanings could change based on who was doing the weighing. After all, symbols are slippery things, especially when they're literally slippery with wax. You edge closer. One young apprentice is giggling while carving what appears to be a man squatting on a turtle. His master raises an eyebrow, not disapproving, more like amused. Turns out, some weights were meant to be funny. Playful jabs at neighbors, exaggerated caricatures, or the 18th century version of office humor passed around in brass form. You think memes are new? Please. These folks were embedding satire into functional tools long before anyone invented Wi-Fi. And then there were the serious ones. A lion crushing a smaller animal, a pair of scales held by a blindfolded woman. Yes, even justice got its own sculpture. These weren't just artistic flexes. They reminded traders and chiefs alike of the deeper stakes behind each gram of gold. If you're weighing payment for a burial, maybe you use a weight shaped like a coffin. If it's a wedding dowry, maybe 2 entwined figures. Or a chicken, yes, because in some proverbs, chickens represent both prosperity and gossip. Which, frankly, is an amazing combination. But here's the quirky part. Some sculptors had signatures. Not literal names, but stylistic flourishes. A certain way of curving a tail, or exaggerating the eyes on human figures. Families passed these down. You could recognize an artisan's work like you might clock a painter's brushstroke today. And among themselves, these artists had reputations. One might be known for politically spicy weights, another for making everything slightly heavier than standard. Helpful if you're in on the scam, less so if you're not. You spot a work in progress sitting off to the side. It looks half-formed, like a frog caught mid-leap. One leg's detailed, the other still wax. It's waiting for the sculptor's next mood. And here's where things get philosophical. These figures lived between worlds, part economy, part language, part spirit. The sculptors didn't just shape brass, they shaped how people thought about value, morality, and identity, all with objects the size of a boiled egg. Occasionally, a weight would spark controversy. Maybe it looked too much like a sacred symbol, or like a local chief's unusually shaped nose. Some were quietly confiscated or buried. Some got their makers banned, or invited to make more, but politely this time. Censorship existed, but it came with better snacks and a slightly sharper spear at your back. You sit for a moment, just watching. There's a quiet rhythm to it all. Scrape, carve, melt, pour, polish. The fire crackles like it's telling its own stories, and you realize these sculptors don't see themselves as artists, or as engineers, or even particularly important. They're just doing the work. But through their hands pass messages, money, and the occasional hidden threat dressed up as a lizard. You see a finished weight cooling off to the side, still warm from casting. It's shaped like a stool, the traditional Ashanti symbol of authority. No one's touching it. Not yet. It's almost as if the stool is watching you, daring you to weigh something heavy. Your conscience, maybe, your debts, your dreams. One sculptor finally speaks, voice gravelly. He says, "The gold can lie, but the weight remembers." Then he smiles, shrugs, and goes back to his work like he didn't just drop a proverb strong enough to knock your sandals off. You step back into the night air. The torchlight's softer now. The market's hushed, but these sculptors are still working, carving the economy, the gossip, the pride, and the sorrow of a whole people into creatures no taller than your thumb. Sculptors in the shadows, leaving behind messages even they might not fully understand. You wake up, or at least you feel like you're waking up from a trance of firelight and brass frogs, and suddenly you're standing at the foot of a palace that doesn't sparkle or tower but looms all the same. Its walls are made of earth, but its foundation, that's gold. Not bars stacked in vaults, but dust stored in calabashes, packed in pouches, locked in boxes under mats and beds and throne cushions. This is Kumasi, heart of the Ashanti Empire, sometime in the 18th century. And this city breathes gold. Everything here is measured in it, not in weight alone, but in worth. A bride's value, a warrior's honor, a chief's loyalty, they all convert back, somehow, to tiny bits of metal swept carefully from goat-hide pouches. You walk through the capital and see it everywhere, not flaunted, but embedded like veins in the body of daily life. Someone offers thanks with a sprinkle of dust in a shrine, a fine paid with a twist of golden cloth. Even a child's naming ceremony might involve a symbolic speck of gold tucked behind the ear. And floating through all of this, quiet, precise, and probably a little exhausted, are the gold weighers. But let's zoom out a little. Because the Ashanti didn't just use gold, they weaponized it. Politically, economically, and spiritually. You remember how people used to say money talks. Here, gold dust whispers, and those whispers could topple or save entire provinces. See, the empire was massive, not just in size, but in complexity. Dozens of clans, cities, and subordinate chiefdoms all orbiting Kumasi like bees around a hive. And gold dust was the common language, the currency that made the web stick together. The Ashanti didn't mint coins. Didn't need to. Why press a king's face onto a disc when you already had centuries of tradition saying that a leopard-shaped weight equaled this much, and a fish-shaped one meant that much? It was a system of weight standards. And yes, there were official royal weights used by the bureaucracy, but also dozens of variations floating around, like different dialects of the same language. Historians still argue whether these weight systems ever truly standardized, or if the empire functioned with one foot in precision and one in poetic license. You're brought into a courtyard where disputes are being settled. A merchant from the north claims he was shortchanged by a southern trader. There's no yelling, just a quiet standoff as two gold weighers pull out their sets. One uses a turtle, the other counters with a lizard. They argue, not about the design, but about the weight behind the symbol. A scribe nearby jots everything down in charcoal on a board, and eventually a chief intervenes, pointing at one of the weights and saying, "This one was blessed by my grandfather, we trust it." And just like that, legacy beats measurement. The quirky part, some families kept ancestral weights that were believed to have never been wrong, never tampered with, never unjust. And if you dared to question one, you weren't just insulting the weigher, you were insulting 3 generations of very serious-looking grandmothers. Which, let's be honest, is way scarier than insulting a king. It wasn't just internal either. Ashanti gold traveled. It got traded north to the Sahel, west to the coast, east to the edge of the forests where rival kingdoms eyed it with quiet hunger. European merchants showed up, wide-eyed and greedy, offering rifles and textiles in exchange for gold dust. The Ashanti played this game well. They didn't hand over gold easily. They negotiated hard, weighed carefully, and made sure their scales tilted in their own favor whenever they could get away with it. One historical fact that surprises modern economists is how stable this system was. For centuries, this society ran on gold dust without imploding from fraud or hyperinflation. Sure, there were disputes, some shady dealings, but overall, it worked. Because gold wasn't just money, it was moral. Sacred. Even, you didn't spill it, hoard it, or disrespect it without risking serious spiritual consequences. Some believed that if you cheated with gold, it would come back to haunt your lineage. And you know how lineages tend to take things personally. You walk past an office of record keepers, the pre-colonial IRS, if you will. Except instead of spreadsheets, they have bundles of palm leaves, carved symbols, and memorized ledgers recited in twitone chants. They track taxes owed to the Ashanti, the emperor, tribute payments from vassal chiefs, even compensations for injured warriors. All weighed out in dust, measured by those brass creatures you now recognize as the quiet gatekeepers of this golden ecosystem. A weigher tells you, casually, that one lion-shaped weight in his set has been used to buy 2 plots of land, settle a murder fine, and pay off a drought debt. He says it like you might talk about a favorite coffee mug. But the reverence is there. You ask if he's ever thought of using something else. He shrugs. Why, the lion knows what it's worth. And just when you think you've seen it all, you're taken to a vault. Not one made of steel and laser sensors, but a quiet backroom with heavy chests and tight-lipped guards. Inside are rows upon rows of unused weights, many wrapped in cloth, waiting for the right moment, the right transaction, or the right dream. Because some weren't meant to be used daily. They were ceremonial, ritualistic, meant for high-level court proceedings or royal installations. One weight is shaped like a human figure with wings. Nobody touches it. It hasn't been used in decades, but its presence alone changes the mood in the room. You feel like it's watching you back. It's here you learn another peculiar fact. Some weights were never meant to balance anything at all. They were political props, designed to send a message. A warning, maybe, or a pledge. One old man recounts how a chief once gifted a rival a set of deliberately flawed weights. One heavier, one lighter, to suggest that his loyalty couldn't be trusted. Subtle, maybe petty, definitely, effective, absolutely. Outside, the empire hums along. Gold weighs justice. Gold weighs vengeance. Gold weighs memory. And all of it is trusted because of those tiny brass artifacts, each one a sculpture, a proverb, a gamble, and a promise, all rolled into one shining symbol. You walk back through the streets of Kumasi, the sun dipping low and painting the clay walls gold. Not gilded, not ostentatious, just quietly radiant. As night falls again, you pass a weigher locking up his box. He looks at the sky, then at you, and says, "You can measure gold, but you can't measure trust. That's what the weights are for." Then he chuckles, hoists his box under one arm, and disappears into the dusk, leaving you standing there, wondering how something so small could hold up an entire empire, and how, somehow, it still does. You step off the dusty main road again, this time led by the clinking sound of brass against wood, subtle but unmistakable, like a pocket full of coins whispering secrets. You follow the sound to a weigher sitting beneath a tree, cross-legged, as if he's been waiting for you since before your birth. In front of him is a box, not too big, not too flashy, but stained with time and decorated with carvings that almost shimmer in the shade. He opens it slowly, not like it's a box, but like it's a conversation. Inside is a compact world. Not chaos, not clutter, just carefully nested stories made of brass. Weights of all shapes and cryptic meanings lie in their own compartments, each one resting in a small pouch or wrapped in woven cloth. And next to them, little spoons for scooping dust, miniature scales made of bone and wood, and smooth stones used for calibration. This isn't just a weigher's toolkit. It's an archive, a diary, a polyglot translator of economics, politics, and low-key insults. The boxes themselves are as important as what they carry. Ashanti gold weight boxes, often carved from hardwoods like mahogany or ebony, were status symbols on their own. They didn't just hold weights, they reflected who you were, what you believed, and which ancestors were probably judging your financial choices. You notice some with symbols carved into the lid: a spider, a stool, a pair of interlocked fish. Not just decoration, these are codes. Proverbs made physical. Messages whispered before any word is spoken. One historical fact that collectors and scholars agree on: many of these boxes were passed down through generations, growing heavier not just with brass but with memory. A single box might have been used by a grandfather to buy a canoe, by a father to settle a land dispute, and now by a son to pay school fees for a cousin's kid. Each transaction leaves no written trace, but the box remembers. If it had a soul, it would be exhausted and wise. You ask if the weights ever get mixed up, swapped out, or heaven forbid, stolen. The weigher laughs. A thief can steal dust, but the box will always know. That's not metaphor. That's a quiet belief that these tools are not inert, they carry energy. Vibes, if you will. Some even believe that disrespecting a weight, dropping it, mocking it, or using it for deception can lead to misfortune. And not the vague, horoscope kind. We're talking sudden illness, collapsing roofs, mysteriously spoiled yam stew. You're invited to lift one of the weights. It's shaped like a spider and heavier than it looks. There's a fine groove worn into the bottom where decades of use have left a smooth line. You realize this isn't a replica or a museum piece. This spider has made decisions. It has resolved arguments, bought lives, punished lies. You gently place it back, half convinced it blinked at you. The quirky part: some boxes had secret compartments, false bottoms, hidden cavities to store extra gold dust or reserve weights for sensitive transactions. Like when your cousin owes you for borrowing your cow, but you still want to remain friends. Or when you're bribing an official without looking like you're bribing an official. People didn't just weigh with these boxes, they played chess with them. Moves, countermoves, and well-timed silences. You watch the weigher lay out a full set, 12 weights in a tidy row, arranged from lightest to heaviest. He doesn't even glance as he does it. His fingers know which is which just from the feel, the curve, the coolness of the brass. It's like watching a pianist warm up. And when he scoops a bit of gold dust, carefully, always carefully, you realize something subtle. The weigher is less like a merchant and more like a priest. Each movement is precise, reverent, ritualistic. There's an open scholarly debate about whether these weighers were technically part of the religious order or simply respected craftsmen with a sacred role. The lines blur. Some say they made offerings to their weights before using them. Others say they carried charms to protect their scales from interference, both spiritual and political. And honestly, if you've ever tried to weigh sand in a windy courtyard with two rival families staring at you, a charm might be the least of what you'd want. But even here, in this quiet corner under the tree, corruption wasn't impossible. There were always whispers of doctored weights, brass cores filled with denser metal, hollowed out to favor one side of the scale. You raise an eyebrow at the weigher, who just smiles and says, "Only the foolish think the dust won't notice." Another proverb disguised as a threat. Nice. You lean over and notice one odd object in the box. Not a weight, not a spoon, but a tiny brass figure of a man riding a fish. "What's that one?" you ask. He shrugs. "No one remembers, but it brings me luck." Sometimes, symbols outlive their explanations. The figure probably meant something 3 generations ago. Maybe go with the flow, or don't marry a fisherman's daughter unless you can swim. But now it just lives there, nestled in the corner, like an old friend whose name you've forgotten but still invite to dinner. Boxes like this existed all over the Ashanti region, in big cities and tiny villages, at royal courts and roadside stalls. And while each one was different, carved differently, stocked differently, they all shared something sacred. They were grounded in belief, not just belief in gold, but in fairness, in reputation, in the idea that even in the mess of trade and debt and human weakness, there could be order, wrapped in brass and carried in wood. As the sun dips lower, the weigher packs everything back into his box, gently like a librarian shelving ancient scrolls. Each weight gets a last glance, a soft cloth wrap, a careful nudge into its compartment. Then he closes the lid and ties a leather strap around it. You realize something: the box doesn't just store wealth. It is wealth, portable, practical, philosophical. And just before you leave, he hands you a small, flat weight shaped like a bird, not to keep, just to hold. He watches your hand and says, "Even the smallest bird leaves tracks in the sand." Then he winks and reclaims the bird, tucking it away with a kind of ceremony. You feel like you've just been handed, and then gently denied, a secret. You walk away slowly. The sound of the lid clicking shut echoes longer than it should, and in your mind, you hear it again and again, not like a box closing, but like a story pausing. Until the next time someone dares to weigh truth against gold. By now, you've probably realized that nothing in this world of dust and brass happens by accident, which brings you naturally to the people behind the scenes, the artists, alchemists, and frankly, magicians, who conjured these tiny golden judges from molten metal and folklore. You're taken down a narrow path, the kind that feels like it's been walked since the beginning of storytelling itself, until you find yourself standing in a village workshop where fire meets form and symbols are born. A forge crackles quietly in the corner, not the big, industrial kind you might see in documentaries, but a squat furnace surrounded by gourd bowls, clay molds, and soot-covered fingers moving like they've memorized the rhythm of creation. You sit on a low stool and try not to inhale too much ash as the gold weight maker, bare-chested, deeply focused, heats a crucible of brass. It's not just metal, it's intention, waiting to be shaped. The secret sauce here is lost wax casting. You've probably heard of it, fancy art history term, but here it's as casual as making breakfast. First, they sculpt a tiny version of the weight out of beeswax. Every curve, every claw, every wrinkle in a miniature elephant's trunk, painstakingly poked and pinched by hand. These wax sculptures are then coated in a fine clay mixture to form a mold. Once dry, they're fired. The wax melts away, hence lost wax, leaving behind a cavity begging to be filled with molten brass. And this is where things get serious. The brass, an alloy of copper and zinc, is poured with steady hands and focused eyes. There's no measuring cup, no safety goggles. Just generations of practice, the smell of hot metal, and a prayer or two whispered into the smoke. Once cooled, the clay mold is shattered, revealing the brass form inside. No two weights are ever exactly alike, even when they try, even when they mean to. There's always a fingerprint of imperfection, like a heartbeat trapped in metal. A historical fact worth noting here is that this same lost wax process was also used for larger Ashanti bronze sculptures, royal regalia, ceremonial items, and yes, even those giant gold masks that make you wonder how anyone managed to wear them without tipping over. But in the world of gold weights, the scale is intimate, and the symbolism even more precise. You ask how a craftsman chooses what form to make next. He grins, shrugs, and taps his temple. The story comes, I make it, that's it. No blueprint, no spreadsheet of animal weight conversions. Just the stories that walk into his head and demand to be solid. He shows you a few: an old woman balancing a pot on her head, a crocodile eating a bird, a stool with human legs. Each one tied to a proverb, a warning, a joke so old it's grown a beard. And that's the quirky part. Many of these weight designs weren't invented for measurement at all. They were tiny philosophical mic drops, like the one shaped like two men back to back with a snake between them. It represents mistrust. Another shows a fish with hands, which scholars still argue whether it's a comment on ambition or just someone's weird lunch hallucination. One more shows a tortoise on top of a leopard. Don't even try to guess the meaning. The stories are as layered as the brass itself. Historians still argue whether each shape had a consistent proverb attached across the Ashanti Empire or whether meanings changed depending on the region, the weigher, or how much palm wine had been consumed that day. But that mystery is part of the appeal. These objects are visual riddles, punchlines without context, inside jokes from an ancestor you never met. You watch as a new wax model takes shape. This one's a bird with an egg in its beak. The craftsman pauses, then says softly, a reminder to return and retrieve what you left behind. You think it might be about memory, or regret, or just a lesson in not leaving your groceries unattended. Either way, it's beautiful. He places it aside to dry and begins coating another wax figure in clay, humming a rhythm older than the forge. When the molds are broken open, the raw brass emerges, dull, rough, uneven. But then comes the polishing. They take tiny knives, stones, sometimes even bits of broken pottery, and gently scrape, smooth, and shine the surface. It takes hours, sometimes days. And even then, the artist might decide it's not ready. One man tells you he once buried a weight in the earth for a week to let the soil cool its spirit. You nod, pretending you understand, while mentally filing that under extreme crafting. The box of finished weights in the corner gleams faintly, like a tray of secrets waiting to be weighed. The figures seem to breathe when you're not looking directly at them. A man walks in from the next village, picks one up without a word, hands over some cloth and cowries, and leaves. No haggle, no receipt, just an exchange of meaning. You realize something else. The value of the weight isn't only in how much it weighs, it's also in the story it carries. And that story can sometimes tip the scale more than the gold dust ever could. Outside, the breeze carries the scent of smoke and fresh yam. Children play with wooden toys shaped suspiciously like gold weights. Little crocodiles chasing frogs, brass birds bouncing on string. It's imitation, yes, but also apprenticeship in disguise. One boy holds up a carved weight to the sun and says, "This one is for liars." You don't ask where he learned that. You sit again with the craftsman as he pulls a finished piece from a mold. It's a man holding a drum, standing on a fish with a bird on his shoulder. You stare, he shrugs. Some truths need music, others need swimming. You nod, as if that explains everything. And in a weird way, it sort of does. By the time you leave, your clothes smell faintly of brass and memory. The forge is still burning, still shaping stories into weight and silence. You walk away thinking, if the written word had never existed, this is how history would survive. Through tiny sculptures of tangled metaphors, through jokes disguised as justice, through the weight of a proverb pressed into your palm like a blessing, you return to the open-air market, now slightly more sunburned and infinitely more suspicious of anything without a hidden meaning. There's noise, yes, laughter, bargaining, chickens doing whatever chickens do, but your ears are trained now. You hear the click of metal on wood, the creak of a tiny beam teetering back and forth, and you know exactly what that is. A scale. Not the digital, soulless kind blinking at you in a fluorescent-lit store. No, this one is older than most family trees and twice as honest. You find the weigher sitting beneath a broadleaf tree, his scale suspended from a carved wooden stand like some sacred object awaiting judgment. The scale is deceptively simple, two brass pans hung by cords from a horizontal beam, which itself balances on a small, sharpened peg or a fulcrum carved into a block of wood. But you learn quickly, this is no ordinary stick-and-string contraption. It's precise, it's particular, and it has absolutely no patience for your modern assumptions. One pan holds your dust, carefully poured from a tiny leather pouch, sifted like powdered sugar, golden and glittering under the sun. The other pan, a brass figurine, squat and stern, probably a spider or maybe a sleeping porcupine, it's hard to tell, but its weight is exact. No cheating, no adjusting, no close enough. If the beam tilts even a hair to the side, the deal is off. You can feel the tension, the stillness, the silent agreement between buyer and seller. This isn't a scale, it's a courtroom. A mainstream historical fact most people gloss over. Scales in Ashanti culture weren't just measurement devices, they were legal instruments. Disputes over land, cattle, or dowries could hinge on what the scale said. Entire marriages paused until the beam was satisfied. Even kings weren't above it. If the pan didn't balance, your story didn't hold. You either paid what you owed or you lost face, and losing face was like losing your soul, only slightly more inconvenient. You lean in to watch the weighing happen. The weigher's eyes barely blink. His hand moves with the same reverence a monk might use for holy relics. The weight touches the pan. Dust is added grain by grain. The beam lifts, shudders, hovers, then settles perfectly level. A sigh of relief from both sides. A deal has been struck. You didn't realize how nervous you were until you hear yourself exhale. And here's the fringe tidbit that makes your brain do cartwheels. Some scales were believed to be alive, not in the Pinocchio sense, but in a spiritual way. Weighers often anointed their scales with sacred oils, gave them names, even swore oaths on them. There are whispered stories of scales that refused to balance for corrupt officials. Others were said to have grown heavy with lies, unable to swing properly until purified by ritual. And yes, at least one scale was reportedly buried for 3 days and came back clean. Make of that what you will. You see children watching the weigher work. One tries to mimic the process with a stick and 2 coconut shells. It's adorable and also deadly serious. Because in this world, the scale is where power and ethics meet. It's where gold turns into action, into favor, into food. That simple beam, swaying in the afternoon air, decides more than just trade, it balances trust, reputation, legacy. There's an open scholarly debate about whether scales were standardized across the Ashanti region or customized by individual craftsmen. Some argue that royal decrees set strict proportions for trade weights and scale arms, while others claim each village had its own secret ratio, passed down like a family recipe. What's clear is that every weigher knew their instrument like a sibling. Not just the way it looked or felt, but the way it behaved, how it responded to heat, to humidity, to the subtle warp of time. You get a closer look. The scale beam is carved from hardwood, sometimes iroko or odum, dense, sturdy stuff that resists warping. The cords are made of twisted fibers, oiled to stay flexible and strong. The pans, circular and shallow, often have tiny engraved marks. Some say these are initials, others say they're protective sigils to ward off theft or imbalance. The entire device weighs maybe a pound, yet it carries the ethical weight of 1,000 decisions. One weigher tells you a story, half whisper, half chuckle, about a rival who tampered with his cords, shortening one just enough to tilt the results. The trick was caught when a curious goat knocked the beam over, and everyone realized the honest traitor had been, turning dust into daylight. The punishment, public shaming, confiscated weights, and a lifetime of customers who only paid in bad jokes. Trust, once broken, rarely balances again. Another tale, told with a wink, describes a scale that would only balance when the traitor told the truth out loud. The goat wasn't mine. Clink, balance. The yam field is 3 plots, not 5. Clink, perfectly level. It might be fiction, or it might be collective memory, rebranded as bedtime caution. Either way, you can't help but glance nervously at the nearest beam, just in case it's judging your internet history. The weigher lets you hold the scale for a moment. It's lighter than you expect, but solid. Quiet, like holding the breath before a verdict. You lift it, let the pans dangle, and feel how even the smallest motion shifts the equilibrium. It's mesmerizing. You imagine the centuries of hands that held tools just like this, trying to tilt life in their favor, hoping the scale didn't see through their intentions. Then you learn something strange but beautiful. In some rituals, the scale wasn't just used for buying and selling, it was used in oaths of loyalty. Two men would place equal weights in each pan, swear honesty, then add 1 grain of dust. If the beam stayed balanced, the gods were pleased. If not, someone was lying, and the spirits were definitely keeping receipts. In that moment, you realize the scale isn't a tool, it's a mirror, and not everyone likes what it shows. The afternoon deepens. Shadows stretch long across the earth. You watch one last weighing, a smooth exchange, a nod, a quiet agreement sealed with dust and steel. The beam lifts, rock settles. You hear again that subtle creak, that tiny sound that once rang through palaces, courtrooms, farms, and markets. It's the sound of fairness. The sound of truth measuring gold, or maybe the other way around. And as you turn to leave, you find yourself whispering, not out loud, but in your head, your own truth, just to see if the scale would tilt. By now, you've held it in your hands, felt it sift through your fingers like stardust with an ego. Gold dust. Real, actual, elemental gold, broken down into the tiniest bits you can imagine, and yet somehow still holding the power to buy goats, wives, land, and silence. You pause, because if that doesn't blow your modern mind, not much will. You've been taught to think of money as bills, coins, or worse, pixels on a banking app. But here, in this sticky, sunlit corner of West Africa, currency is something you could spill, something you could inhale by accident, something you might lose forever if you sneeze too hard. A man opens his pouch beside you. It's made of antelope hide, soft and worn like the pockets of time. He gently unties it and reveals a fine mound of gold powder, stored inside folded leaves or sometimes tightly knotted silk. No banks, no armored trucks, just leaves and leather and a healthy amount of respect. And that's the kicker. You'd expect dust to be cheap, dirty, meaningless. But here, gold dust is sacred, nearly sentient. It needs to be protected, weighed carefully, and watched like a mischievous spirit always looking for an escape. The transaction begins. He takes a tiny spoon carved from bone, dips it gently into the dust, and sprinkles, just the right amount, into one pan of a scale. Other pan holds a gold weight shaped like a frog with a knowing grin. The dust shifts, the beam trembles. You can almost feel it holding its breath. Then balance. The deal is done, the goat is his, and somehow the universe approves. A mainstream historical fact here. Gold dust was the dominant currency in the Ashanti Empire for centuries. Not just for locals, but for long-distance traders as well. European merchants, especially the Portuguese and later the British, absolutely salivated over this system. They brought their own scales, attempted to standardize exchange rates, and mostly just ended up confused. Because the Ashanti weren't buying what they were selling, they already had gold, thank you very much. What they wanted was cloth, iron, salt, and the occasional musket. You know, priorities. But here's a little fringe twist for your sleepy brain. Some people believed the dust itself had moods. If you disrespected it, handled it with dirty hands, stored it near bad company, or tried to cheat with it, it could turn against you. The most unlucky traders were said to have gold that would evaporate overnight. Of course, historians still argue whether this was metaphor, myth, or just mice with expensive taste. Either way, nobody risked it. You watch closely as traders clean their dust before weighing. Yes, clean it. With soft brushes made from animal hair, or by blowing gently through a straw to separate out impurities, sand, bits of leaf, or even crushed quartz that had no business pretending to be royal. This cleaning ritual isn't just about accuracy, it's a show of respect, like putting on your best outfit before visiting the king. If gold dust was the heartbeat of the economy, it deserved to shine. One trader leans over and shows you a clever trick. He pinches a bit of dust and drops it onto a polished stone. You hear that? He asks. It makes a faint metallic tick, like a bell whispering to itself. Real gold sings. Fake gold sulks. You try it, and sure enough, there's a tiny sound you almost miss, but it's there like a promise in metal form. A sleepy chime for the attentive ear. Historians still argue whether the gold dust economy was truly efficient or simply romanticized. Some claim it was fragile, too easily manipulated, too dependent on trust. Others argue it was more transparent than our modern systems, where algorithms and invisible credit scores decide your fate. What's clear is that every single transaction required patience, negotiation, and that rarest of ingredients, mutual understanding. No barcode scanners, no receipts, just eyes, hands, dust, and decades of tradition. You begin to notice the small pouches people wear tied around their waists, sometimes tucked into cloth wraps or hidden in hair. Some are plain, others embroidered with family symbols or secret signs. These are their wallets, not just functional, but deeply personal. Some pouches have charms sewn into them, bits of shell, feathers, even tiny beads meant to protect the gold from theft or spiritual interference. Imagine walking into a 7-Eleven with your grandmother's blessing stitched into your Venmo account. And the vocabulary. Oh, the words used to describe amounts are as fluid and poetic as the dust itself. There are no coins or 20s. Instead, trades are discussed in terms of what balances the weight of 2 frogs, or a lion and a half. You try not to laugh, but it's like haggling in riddles, and somehow it works. Everyone understands because they've grown up speaking weight as fluently as they speak twi. You ask someone what happens if gold dust is stolen. The answer is simple and sharp. It shames the hands that take it. Not a legal sentence, but a spiritual one. Reputation matters here more than profit. A dishonest trader might still eat well, but he'll never sleep peacefully. Stories spread faster than dust in wind, and a bad name can weigh heavier than any brass crocodile. You sit beside a trader who's just finished a deal. He opens his pouch again and counts his earnings, grain by grain. The gold glows faintly in the low light. He doesn't smile, but his eyes soften like someone admiring a quiet fire. This, he says, is not money, it is memory. You don't ask him to explain. Some things you just accept, especially when they come from a man who spent decades talking to metal. The sun dips lower, casting a golden sheen on everything around you. For a fleeting moment, the entire village looks gilded. Even the children playing with sticks seem to shimmer. You imagine a world where all currency rustled in pouches, glinted in the sun, and could literally blow away if you weren't careful. A world where money had weight, real, honest-to-goodness weight, and no one was rich unless the scale said so. And you wonder, what would your life look like if every transaction involved pausing, cleaning, balancing, and looking someone in the eye? Maybe you'd buy less. Maybe you'd mean it more. Maybe you'd carry your wealth in pouches and stories, instead of numbers on a screen. And just like that, you find yourself falling asleep to the idea of gold that whispers, that waits, that sometimes disappears just to see if you'll chase it. You wake slowly to the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of something being carved, not far from the market but quieter, like a secret being shaped into form one chip at a time. The scent of hot brass lingers in the air, tinged with wood smoke and something earthy, maybe clay or burnt oil. You follow the sound down a narrow footpath lined with plantain leaves and whispering children. Then you see them, the sculptors. Not towering artists in marble-strewn workshops, but cross-legged artisans hunched over tiny molds, coaxing entire economies out of wax and flame. They're making the weights, not the gold ones, of course, that's your job to provide. These weights are the brass figures, the measuring tools, the silent accountants of a system where nothing is written but everything is recorded. A quiet ledger of lions, snakes, ladders, drums, horns, and things you can't quite identify. You watch one man shape a miniature stool, his fingers steady, his face almost bored with perfection. It looks ceremonial, like a tiny throne for a mouse king. But it's more than art, it's data. A mainstream historical fact that gets swept under the rug. These gold weights were not just practical tools, they were a system of knowledge, like a visual abacus married to a library of oral traditions. More than 60 recognized shapes, each with multiple meanings, each telling a story when paired together. They could represent proverbs, social obligations, cautionary tales, or ancestral warnings. When a trader laid out weights, he was speaking without opening his mouth. It was literal financial language. Call it emoji economics if you're feeling cheeky. You get closer and see the process. First, beeswax, soft, pliable, and shockingly obedient, is shaped into a figure. A crocodile, maybe, or two men shaking hands. Then it's encased in a clay mold, and that mold is baked until the wax runs out, leaving a tiny hollow cave in its memory. Next comes the pour. Molten brass, glowing like sunrise and dangerous as betrayal, is tipped in slowly, filling the void. You realize the metaphor before anyone explains it. The wax is the idea, the clay is the vessel, and the brass is truth, hardened by fire. Good luck forgetting that when you're trying to sleep later. Here's a fringe detail you won't find in your old-school textbooks. Some gold-weight sculptors were known to include tiny flaws or symbols visible only under close inspection. A notch under a frog's leg. A subtle scratch behind a warrior's ear. These weren't mistakes, they were identifiers. Signatures, really. Some were said to be magical keys, unlocking meanings that only the initiated could decode. Others, pure pettiness. A sculptor might add a secret mocking symbol to weights sold to an enemy, because who says economic sabotage can't also be stylish? You meet a young apprentice who shows you his first ever weight, a coiled snake, barely the length of your pinky nail. It's imperfect. The tail curls too fast, and the head is a little stubby, like it was made by a snake in a rush. But he holds it with pride. It says, "A snake never forgets where it bit," he tells you, reciting a proverb. It means debts are remembered, even when forgiven. You nod, pretending you understood that the first time. It's okay. These weights weren't built to impress, they were built to remember. Historians still argue whether every sculptor followed a codified symbol system or if regional variation was the rule of the day. Some evidence suggests royal guilds tried to standardize meanings, especially for trade with outsiders. Others claim meanings shifted over time, like slang does. What meant a fair deal in one village might mean, "Don't trust this man with your goats" in another. Either way, the symbols had power. You didn't just weigh gold, you told a story about it. And stories, as you've learned, weigh more than dust. You crouch beside an older sculptor who's polishing a dried brass piece with fine ash and lemon peel. It's a monkey holding a stick. "What does that one mean?" you ask. He doesn't look up. It means the monkey who imitates the hunter will soon meet the leopard. You blink. "So, don't copy dangerous people." He nods slowly. "Or don't be foolish," or maybe it means watch where you swing your stick. You get the sense he's not going to narrow it down further, and you kind of love that. Not every weight was based on animals or proverbs. Some were geometric, cubes, pyramids, spirals, and stepped rectangles. They look modern in your hand, like abstract art that accidentally wandered into the past. Some say these shapes were pure math, meant to measure exact amounts for high-value exchanges. Others believe they had ritual meaning, used in transactions involving land or marriage. The truth, probably both. In the Ashanti world, form and function didn't just hold hands, they danced. You see one particularly strange weight, two birds joined at the beak, wings outstretched, standing on a sunburst. It looks mythic, like it fell out of a dream and landed in someone's wallet. That's Sankofa, someone explains. It means go back and get it. A reminder to retrieve what was lost, to honor the past, to bring old wisdom forward. And here you are doing exactly that, listening to the soft language of brass and memory echo through your sleepy brain. The sculptors don't work fast. They don't have to. Each weight takes days, sometimes weeks, depending on size and complexity. There are no bulk orders, no overnight delivery. A man might commission a set to mark a birth, a treaty, or a moment of forgiveness. Once made, they were kept like heirlooms, wrapped in cloth, hidden from rain and envy, passed down as silent sermons between generations. You don't own a weight like that. You inherit it. You become responsible for its meaning. Someone shows you a box filled with old weights, used, worn, burnished by decades of touch. He holds one up. It's a ladder with 6 rungs. This one means climb slowly and the ladder won't break. Another is a tiny drum. Speak when spoken to. A crab with outstretched claws. Not every sideways move is a retreat. You're amazed and also slightly worried these weights know more about your life choices than you do. As twilight comes on and fireflies start gossiping in the shadows, the sculptors clean their tools, fold their mats, and tuck their day's work into fabric bundles. You realize you've spent the day watching not craftsmen, but memory keepers. They sculpt currency, yes, but more importantly, they sculpt context. Each weight is a sentence in a language that never needed ink. A poem you carry in your pocket, a warning or a blessing, depending on how you read it. You head back toward the village, the weight of a tiny bird still in your palm. You think about all the invisible ledgers these people carry in their minds. Not numbers in spreadsheets, but stories in metal. Lessons in form. Cautionary tales in miniature. And you wonder, if you had to sculpt your own weight, what shape would it take? What lesson would it teach? You don't answer right away. You let the question dangle there, warm and glowing like a fresh-poured drop of brass, waiting to cool into truth. You hear it before you see it, a low, earthy rustle in the water, like something large moving slowly beneath the surface, unbothered by your tiny human presence. The river beside the trading post winds through reeds and deep shadows, its surface glinting gold beneath the early morning sun. And there, sunning itself on a half-submerged rock, is the unmistakable outline of a crocodile. Ancient, still, smiling in that unnerving way crocodiles do, like they know the secret ending of every story you haven't started yet. And if you're surprised to see it, don't be. Crocodiles are more than wildlife here, they're symbols, icons, business partners in a weird and toothy sort of way. You notice one carved on a nearby weight, its long back arching into a symbol that could be mistaken for a smile or a threat, depending on how well your trade deal is going. It's no coincidence. In Ashanti culture, crocodiles meant more than just look out, sharp teeth. They meant survival, adaptability, profit, and most importantly, balance. One mainstream historical fact you can take to the bank. Crocodiles were a recurring motif in Ashanti gold weights, pottery, textiles, and architecture, not because they were rare, but because they were respected. This was a creature that could live in water and walk on land, a creature that could be still for hours, then explode into terrifying speed. Traders admired that. The ability to wait, observe, and strike only when necessary. That was business advice in scaly form. You sit with an elder who watches the river like it owes him money. He tells you a proverb, voice low and smooth. The crocodile says, "I have crossed rivers, but I still sweat when I see the dew." You blink, he smiles faintly. It means, even the strong must respect the small things. You get it, eventually. Like most things around here, it's not about being fast, it's about being ready. And the crocodile isn't alone in the symbolic jungle. There's one particular image you see repeated often, 2 crocodiles with one stomach. They're biting at opposite ends of a single meal, locked in an eternal struggle of coexistence and conflict. That's the Sankofa weight for shared destiny. A warning and a reminder. In trade, in politics, even in families, you may not like the other guy, but your future is tied to his appetite. You're stuck in the same belly, my friend, so you'd better figure it out. Fringe detail for your pillow tonight. In some old Ashanti stories, crocodiles were believed to be the spirits of powerful ancestors. They weren't just animals, they were guides. Warnings in flesh. If one appeared near your home, it might mean your grandfather was checking in on your financial decisions. So maybe don't haggle too hard over that bundle of yams. Someone's watching. In fact, it wasn't uncommon for crocodiles to be fed or greeted like elders. You weren't allowed to kill one in certain sacred areas unless you had a really good reason. And he looked at me funny, didn't count. Historians still argue whether this reverence came from myth or from very real cohabitation. Some scholars think crocodiles were just part of the daily scenery, embedded into Ashanti cosmology the same way cats wormed their way into Egyptian tombs. Others believe the symbolism evolved through trade itself. Crocodiles, after all, were masters of border crossing, between land and water, day and night, safety and danger. What better creature to represent a merchant class that constantly negotiated those same lines? You see a young boy playing near the edge of the river. He's carving a crocodile into a piece of soft bark, mimicking the patterns he sees on the gold. Waits at the local trading table. He's too young to buy or sell, but already learning the language of shapes. You realize something important. Trade here is not just transaction, it's culture. Children don't just learn math, they learn metaphor. They're taught how to read the river, the crocodile, the unspoken tension in every deal. It's economics through folklore. MBA via bedtime story. There's another common motif. A crocodile with a fish in its mouth, always mid-bite, never fully chewing. It means take opportunities while they swim past. But the subtle twist is that the fish is always small, tempting but not overwhelming. Traders are taught to go after many small fish rather than one giant whale of a gamble. You start thinking about your own life. How many deals have you chased that were just too big for your emotional teeth? You suddenly feel seen by a brass reptile. One trader invites you to look at his collection of old crocodile-themed weights. They vary in size and style, some long and narrow like elegant daggers, others short and squat like they've been overeating for centuries. He tells you his favorite is the smiling crocodile, used when closing a deal with generosity. If you smile when you trade, the gold smiles back. A little cheesy, but kind of beautiful. He says he never uses that weight, unless he's dealing with someone he wants to keep as a friend. So yeah, there are friendship weights now. You can't help but love that. As the sun rises higher and the river gleams like liquid bronze, you think about all the invisible crocodiles in your own decisions. The ones that wait beneath calm surfaces. The ones that remind you not to act in panic. The ones that say, adapt or go hungry. You see now why traders revered them. Not just as metaphors, but as role models. They weren't flashy, they didn't boast. They simply waited, listened, and when the time came, they moved. You glance back at the real crocodile still lounging on the rock. He hasn't moved an inch, but somehow he feels closer now. Like you've entered into a silent agreement, respect for respect, stillness for stillness. The moment passes and he slides silently into the water, leaving only ripples behind. Like a good deal, his exit is clean, smooth, almost forgettable. But you won't forget. Because now, when you see a crocodile, real or brass, you'll think of value, of risk, of how even in silence, some creatures speak volumes. And maybe, just maybe, the next time you face a hard choice, you'll remember to be like the crocodile. Wait, watch, and strike when it's worth it. You're walking through the market again, and something feels shinier. It's not just the sun, it's the gold dust, glimmering in the morning haze like 1,000 tiny secrets spilled across the palms of fast-talking traders. The air smells like roasted peanuts and heated ambition. You hear a snatch of an argument, something about a grain too light, or maybe a weight that's a little too ambitious. And it dawns on you, this isn't just a market, it's a theater, and everyone's performing in the gold dust hustle. You spot them easily now, those small wooden boxes, their compartments lined with velvet or cloth, holding mounds of gold dust that look like someone captured sunshine and broke it into crumbs. Each box is part vault, part calculator, part ego display, and beside everyone, a trader sits with that unnerving calm of someone who knows what every single speck is worth, or at least pretends to. Mainstream historical fact incoming, gold dust was the main currency in Ashanti commerce. Coins, please, paper bills, try again. This was pre-banking, post-barter brilliance. Gold dust was flexible, measurable, portable. You could weigh just enough to buy a yam or enough to buy a town. But it wasn't foolproof. And this, dear night traveler, is where the hustle begins. First, let's talk tools. Every merchant had a dust box, and every dust box had its entourage: spoons for scooping, brushes made from frayed twine or animal hair for sweeping, scales for weighing, and weights to keep everyone honest. Honestish. Because if you think no one ever brushed a little extra gold into their sleeve or nudged a scale with a casual elbow lean, then bless your trusting heart. You sit beside a young trader who shows you how to balance a scale perfectly. He sets a tiny lion-shaped weight on one side and begins spooning gold dust onto the other with the slow precision of someone diffusing a bomb. When it finally tips, ever so slightly, he smiles and brushes the excess into a separate compartment. For next time, he says, you raise an eyebrow. Is that allowed? He shrugs. It's not allowed. The hustle isn't illegal, it's expected. Here's a fun fringe tidbit. Some traders allegedly carried powdered brass to sprinkle into their gold dust to make it weigh more. It looked similar enough unless you tasted it. Which, yes, people did. In fact, it wasn't uncommon for an experienced merchant to tap a fingertip into the dust and bring it to his tongue, just to be sure. Your modern hygiene reflex twitches violently at the thought. But hey, when the economy is edible, you learn to season your skepticism. You watch a deal unfold. A woman lays out her weights, each a tiny sculpture, one shaped like a turtle, another like an umbrella, another an abstract cluster of triangles you suspect is either deeply meaningful or just modern art centuries ahead of schedule. Her opponent eyes them with the suspicion of someone checking a magician's props. He takes one, blows on it theatrically, weighs it against his own, and shakes his head. Too heavy, he grumbles. She doesn't argue. She just smiles and replaces it with another. This dance goes on for 5 minutes. No shouting, no rushing. Just two gold-dusted chess masters slowly circling each other in smiles and silent arithmetic. Historians still argue whether there were consistent standards for gold weight values across the Ashanti Empire, or if it was all relative, customized by region, relationship, or whim. Some suggest royal treasuries tried to enforce a uniform system with official weight sets. Others argue that trade worked because everyone accepted a certain level of variance, meaning trust and intuition were more important than precision. Either way, merchants had to be as socially savvy as they were mathematically skilled. The dust itself was stored in tight bundles or small pouches tied at the waist. You see a few hung from belts, swinging gently like little golden lungs. Others are hidden beneath wraps or inside hair braids. Yes, really. You overhear a woman boast about smuggling enough gold dust in her hair to buy 3 goats and a hammock. You don't doubt her. In a world where every speck counts, hiding your currency is both security and strategy. There were even professional gold washers who specialized in extracting dust from riverbeds. You meet one, an older man with permanently golden cuticles and a gleam in his eye that says, I know where the real veins run. He talks about early mornings, cold streams, and the delicate swirl of the pan. Gold is shy, he tells you. You have to flirt with it, whisper to the water. You're unsure if he's being poetic or just a little sun-dizzy. Maybe both, but his pouch looks heavy and you respect the man who romanced metal from mud. The language around gold dust is another layer of brilliance. People speak in weights, in animals, in riddles. Half a turtle's worth might mean a certain measure. More than a monkey but less than a drum could refer to a price bracket. It's code, slang, and poetry all rolled into commerce. And if you don't speak it, well, good luck not getting overcharged for that carved stool you suddenly need for cultural reasons. And yes, there were scams. A whole symphony of small deceptions designed to shave off value bit by bit. Slightly off-kilter scales, magnetic brass weights disguised as gold, compartment boxes with false bottoms. But most traders didn't rely on trickery. They relied on reputation. In a market like this, your name was your credit score. If you cheated someone today, everyone knew about it tomorrow. And not just people, weights, boxes, and even gold dust had memories longer than yours. One clever system you learn about is the third-party verifier. Basically, if two merchants didn't trust each other's weights, they could call in a neutral third person with a certified set of weights. Think of it as bringing in a referee with a whistle made of ancestral authority. It didn't solve every dispute, but it made people think twice before they tried to fudge a gram or two. You begin to realize just how sophisticated this dust economy really was. It wasn't primitive or makeshift like old textbooks might have suggested. It was elegant, intuitive, adaptable. It functioned on logic, symbolism, and a little mischief. Every grain had value, but not just monetary. It held memory, trust, and intent. Like a contract written in particles. You watch a final deal of the day. A man trades a woven basket and a carved flute for enough dust to fill a teacup. He shakes hands, brushes the scale clean, and walks away smiling. The dust stays behind, glittering like spilled sunlight. You sit there a moment longer, watching as the trader sweeps it gently back into its compartment, not with greed, but with reverence. Like he's tucking away a story, not a substance. You think again about value, about how something so small, so messy, so prone to loss or deceit can form the backbone of an entire civilization. And you realize maybe it's not about the dust itself. Maybe it's about the people who believe in it, who shape it, who hustle with honor and make magic from metal. And you feel the pull again, that sleepy wonder, that hush between heartbeats when gold isn't just gold. It's a whisper that says, there's always more beneath the surface. You wake to the sound of distant drumming, but it isn't celebratory. It's rhythmic, like punctuation in an invisible sentence being written in the dust. As you stretch and shuffle back into the marketplace, you notice something strange. Not everyone is speaking the same language. And even when they are, the words carry weight like stone carvings dropped into still water. Every syllable matters. Every pause is a negotiation. You've stepped into the multilingual, metaphor-apt world of Ashanti trade communication, and friend, you're going to need your ears sharpened and your metaphors locked and loaded. You sit cross-legged beside a weigher today, watching him scribble what looks like marks on a banana leaf. At first, you think it's doodling. Then you realize it's a code, a logbook without words. Every curved line, dot, and swirl represents something, an amount, a name, a type of item, a debt. He's writing, but not with letters as you know them. And this is the secret script of the marketplace, a shorthand passed down from weigher to apprentice, parent to child. A system as flexible as it is private. Mainstream historical fact you'll want to remember. While the Ashanti used oral tradition as the backbone of culture, many trade professionals developed hybrid systems of record-keeping that included symbols, marks, and numeric codes. These weren't formal alphabets, but they served the same purpose. Tracking who owed what, who paid in gold, who brought salt, who disappeared with 3 goats and a grin. It was ink without grammar, and it worked. Your host leans over and shows you a cluster of symbols carved into a piece of calabash. One looks like a fish spine. Another resembles the shape of a spider web. This means he paid half, he says, pointing. And this says the goods were late. You nod, trying to see the logic. And this, you ask, gesturing at what looks like a chicken riding a canoe. He grins. That one just means bad luck. You learn quickly that the market's real power isn't in the gold or the goods, it's in the language. But not just verbal language. The way a trader raises an eyebrow, or the way a customer taps the edge of a scale, can say more than a page of dialogue. Deals happen in silences as much as in sentences. It's not what's said, it's how it's weighted. Fringe trivia for your dreams tonight. Some Ashanti traders were known to use drum languages to transmit trade alerts and updates between villages. Yes, drum languages. Skilled drummers could mimic the tonal rhythms of spoken Twi so precisely that listeners could understand entire messages from miles away. If someone important was coming, or if someone was coming to cheat, You might hear it announced on the wind, encoded in rhythm, echoing through trees like a heartbeat made of secrets. Historians still argue whether these messages were strictly commercial or if they also carried coded warnings and social gossip. Some say they were purely utilitarian. Trader Kofi arrives with salt by dawn. Others suggest the drums gossiped just like people do. Trader Kofi arrives with salt again but doesn't pay full price. Either way, if you ever hear drums beating in bursts of rising tones while sitting near a pile of yams, assume you're not just listening to music, you're part of a group chat with really intense percussion settings. But the communication magic doesn't stop with ink and drums. You watch a negotiation unfold between two traders who don't share a language. One is Ashanti, the other from across the Sahara. They barely exchange 10 words, but through gestures, shared weights, a few trusted scribbles, and a long, unblinking stare, they manage to agree on the price of 3 bundles of cloth and a small statue shaped like a fertility goddess who looks kind of like she's judging you personally. It's like watching a silent film scored by suspicion and mutual respect. There's a beauty to it, a kind of choreography that's hard to fake. You can't just bluster through a deal with volume. You have to read the other person, measure their hesitations, know when to pause, when to smile, when to quote a proverb that only half makes sense until the other person laughs and throws in an extra weight for good humor. This isn't just trade, it's theater, psychology, and poetry under pressure. You're shown a rare treasure, a small, foldable wooden tablet covered in wax, used by a chief weigher. He presses a stylus into the wax to mark debts owed by other traders. No ink, just impressions. A few flicks, and he smooths over yesterday's debt like erasing footprints from sand. It's practical, impermanent, and deeply symbolic. Debts, like wax, can be reshaped, but only if you know the pattern. One elder whispers to you that certain traders even composed songs with embedded numbers and names, verses only they could interpret. The tune might sound like a lullaby, but it's actually a record of 5 sheep, a delayed payment, and a subtle warning not to mess with Auntie Essie's yam prices again or else. You hum it under your breath. It's catchy and slightly terrifying. Another elder shows you a woven strip of cloth, not decorative but transactional. Each knot, each colored thread represents a deal done, a promise made. If anyone doubts your story, you just unfold your cloth and point. The proof is in the pattern. Think of it as wearable receipts, and possibly also a flex, depending on how colorful it is. And the proverbs, oh, the proverbs are everything. Nobody says, I can't pay you back yet. Instead, they say, the antelope does not rush where the lion naps. You hear someone say, when the drum changes, so must the dancer, which loosely means new rules, friend, get with the program. Every metaphor is layered. A yes can mean maybe. A maybe can mean run. A no can mean try again, but bring a gift this time. What you're witnessing isn't a market with optional flair. It's a system that requires poetry, where facts must hide inside folk tales, where truth wears a costume, and you're expected to figure out the dance moves on the fly. And honestly, it's brilliant. Because in a world without printed contracts, every phrase must pull double duty as both art and insurance. As you prepare to leave the market square for the night, you overhear 2 boys practicing their sales pitch in rhyme. One pretends to be a buyer, the other a seller. They argue, laugh, and swap proverbs like trading cards. You realize that language here isn't just a tool, it's a game, a spell, a handshake disguised as a puzzle. And if you can solve it, the gold flows like music. So next time you hear a drumbeat, a whisper, or a saying that doesn't quite make sense, pause. Listen closer. There may be a fortune or a warning hiding just beneath the rhythm. You wake to a quieter morning. No drums echoing from the hills, no clanging iron pots. Just the soft shuffle of woven sandals brushing packed earth as the weighers begin their day before the market fully stirs. The air is sticky with early heat, and the gold scales you saw yesterday now rest beneath careful cloths, like sleeping snakes that will soon rouse for bargaining and biting. Today, though, you're not watching transactions. You're following the stories carried not in weight or word, but in shape, because these little golden weights, they're not just tools. They're secrets, prayers, jokes, confessions. You're about to walk into the sculptural whisperings of a culture that poured its identity into miniature brass art. You start by tracing the shape of a tiny lion crouching on a brass square. Its eyes bulge slightly, exaggerated for dramatic effect, and its mouth is frozen mid-roar. You ask if it's just decoration. The old weigher next to you chuckles, shaking his head slowly. "That lion," he says, "that lion's a proverb. It says even the hunter's son should fear the forest." It's a reminder that arrogance doesn't weigh well. You smile. These weights, they're talking to you, just not in a language with vowels. Here's a mainstream fact to anchor your sleepy fascination. Akin gold weights, called Abramuo, weren't just utilitarian. They were deeply symbolic, crafted in thousands of unique forms over centuries, each shape loaded with meaning. Ranging from animals to tools, human figures to abstract patterns, these weights transformed the act of weighing gold into a ritual of reflection. Imagine conducting business with a tiny sculpted crocodile judging you from the scale. That's not just commerce, it's character development. You pick up another, this one shaped like a lizard with two heads. A weigher taps your shoulder and whispers the proverb it carries. Two-headed lizards share one stomach. You blink, he grins. Means, don't sabotage your own team just to win an argument. And suddenly it clicks. These aren't just metaphors, they're morality checks. A weight isn't just a standard of mass. It's a reminder of consequence. The quirky fringe tidbit for tonight: some gold weights were created in the form of completely fantastical creatures, hybrids of birds and fish, humans with monkey tails, or horned goats with wings. Historians suspect that some of these represented dreams, jokes, or even coded insults. One particularly famous weight shows a man carrying another man upside down in a basket. The meaning: the fool lifts the one who mocks him. Brutal. You can practically feel the ancient side-eye in brass form. Not all weights were humorous or sharp, though. Many represented tools: hoes, knives, drums, spears. These objects reinforce the value of labor, culture, and defense. A weight shaped like a hoe might be used when paying tribute after a harvest. One shaped like a fishhook might honor a debt after a successful fishing trip. It wasn't random. It was curated symbolism tailored to the situation. Like emoji, but 500 years older and a lot heavier. And yes, there were weights shaped like human figures: warriors mid-strike, women grinding grain, elders seated with walking sticks. These human forms often hinted at status, gender roles, or revered behaviors. A figure with arms spread wide might symbolize generosity. One with a hand over its mouth could be a warning about gossip. You realize suddenly, in Ashanti culture, everything had a moral layer, every sculpture a sermon, every trade a test. You're led to a more private collection, a box buried in the back of a weigher's hut, wrapped in faded cloth. Inside, the weights are older, stranger. One looks like a spiral caught mid-spin. Another, a rectangle with tiny dots lined up like stars. The owner, an older woman with eyes sharp enough to slice yams with a blink, tells you these are coded weights, used for private contracts and secret deals. Some meanings, she says, are known only to family, passed down. If you don't know the code, you don't know the weight. You lean closer, suddenly aware you're breathing on centuries of whispered agreements. Historians still argue whether some gold weights doubled as legal records, contractual symbols so personal they replaced paper entirely. Some say yes. These sculpted codes were essentially notarized deals, unspoken but universally understood by those in the know. Others suggest they were simply expressions of individuality, like how someone today might have a weird signature or a favorite coffee mug with an inside joke printed on it. Maybe it's both. Maybe a gold weight could both measure gold and measure your soul. You wander to a nearby village where apprentices practice sculpting new weights. The air smells like beeswax and hot brass. A boy is making a tiny turtle, his tongue poking out in concentration. "It's for my uncle," he says, to remind him not to rush with fools. You laugh, but he's dead serious. You realize that crafting a weight isn't just about form, it's a process of choosing a truth, then freezing it in metal so it can survive argument, memory, and time itself. Someone hands you a weight shaped like an open hand. You're told it means generosity is not weakness. Another, shaped like a bird looking backward while flying forward, translates to the future is fed by the past. You're not sure whether to admire the craft or curl up in a philosophical ball and nap forever. These weights are hitting you harder than most TED talks. And while most weights were small, no more than a few centimeters across, some were massive ceremonial pieces. These were never used for actual trade, but were brought out during major deals, rituals, or declarations of status. One chief famously used a gold weight shaped like a stool with a snake coiled around its legs. The message, "I rule with wisdom and bite." That's one heck of a mission statement. Some weights were even used as inheritance tokens, passed from one generation to another as both financial value and moral inheritance. You weren't just giving your son a tool, you were giving him a warning, a proverb, a worldview. It's like leaving behind a mixtape, a diary, and a bank vault key all at once. As the sun slips lower, you sit by a fire and watch elders polish their weights. They hold them like old friends, like chapters from a family saga. One man holds up a small brass chicken, laughs softly, and says, This one says even a silent hen lays an egg." You nod, understanding at last that gold weights aren't just about what something costs. They're about what something means. And in Ashanti culture, meaning weighs more than metal. The fire crackles, casting gold glints on the tiny sculptures in your lap. You trace the shapes, trying to decode their riddles. And maybe, just maybe, one day you'll sculpt your own. A tiny fan, a whisper of air in brass, a symbol that says, "Even the wind has weight." The sky darkens to a deep navy, and the quiet hush of evening spills over the village like warm syrup. Somewhere a frog starts up a rhythmic croak, as if he's tapping a beat for the next part of your journey. Tonight, you're peeling back the woven lid of a rarely explored basket, the personal relationships between gold weighers and their weights themselves. Because these weren't just tools sitting around like kitchen measuring cups. They were extensions of the weigher's identity, belief, and authority. You're about to find out that some gold weights were cherished the way someone today might clutch an heirloom pocket watch, or maybe the way a wizard clutches his wand. You follow the same elderly woman from yesterday, the one with the brass eye contact sharp enough to slice through gossip, and she leads you to a shaded mat under a mango tree. Her son is preparing for his own public weighing debut, and she's watching him polish a selection of weights she's been curating since her own grandfather's time. The boy picks one up, a monkey holding a mirror, and she stops him with a glare so sharp it might ignite leaves. "Not that one. That one stays with me." You sit back, suddenly aware that these objects have loyalty lines you do not cross. Here's your mainstream historical tidbit. Gold weights were often passed down through generations, not just for their practical use, but for their symbolism, the wisdom they carried, and the spiritual presence they were believed to hold. Some were even believed to be living, not in the heartbeat sense, but in the sense that they carried memory, absorbed intention, and could shape outcomes. In the words of one particularly poetic elder, a weight remembers your hand. It knows whether you lie. This is where things get especially deliciously odd. One fringe tale, mostly whispered after 3 calabashes of palm wine, is that some master weighers believed their weights could speak to them in dreams. Not literally, of course, more like guidance, a hint of which weight to use in a high-stakes trade, a sense that when weight felt off today, Call it intuition, call it magic, call it I've handled this little brass frog since I was 12 and it never betrayed me. Whatever it is, you learn quickly that in Ashanti culture, the weigher wasn't the master of the weights. The relationship was far more mutual and sometimes mysterious. Take the case of the twin weights, two nearly identical brass turtles said to belong to rival brothers. The story goes that whenever one brother lied during a transaction, his turtle would mysteriously fall over before the trade could be completed. Coincidence? Maybe. Legend? Definitely. But it's one of those things historians still argue about. Were such stories symbolic, literal, or maybe metaphorical warnings dressed up in bedtime drama? Nobody's fully sure, but no one dares disrespect a turtle weight just in case. You watch as a young girl pulls a heavy wooden box from beneath a raised platform. Inside are dozens of carefully wrapped gold weights, each one tucked into cotton like a miniature deity. She unwraps them slowly, reverently. There's one shaped like a hornbill, another like a man playing a drum, and several abstract ones that look like melted chess pieces. Her grandmother explains which ones are used for different buyers. That one, she points to a blocky weight shaped like an old stool, I use when selling to men who bargain too hard. It humbles them. You blink. You've never seen an object used as emotional leverage in real time, but here it is. Brass therapy. Some weighers assigned specific weights to particular markets. Others even believed certain weights performed better during specific seasons. One man insists his weight shaped like a crocodile bites harder during the rainy season, when buyers are grumpier and less likely to haggle for fun. It sounds ridiculous until you remember that many successful people swear by lucky ties or magic coffee mugs. This isn't superstition, it's emotional arithmetic. And gold weights, in all their tiny glory, are fluent in it. You meet a master weigher known only as Uncle Quiet. He hasn't spoken since the war, or so they say, but his collection speaks volumes. Each weight is wrapped in goat leather and labeled with a small tag written in Adinkra symbols. One shows a footprint, another a knot, another just a zigzag with no explanation. You're told Uncle Quiet chooses which weight to use based on the vibe of the person standing before him. He doesn't say a word. He just watches, nods, selects a brass snake or a walking stick or a snoring lion, and sets it gently on the scale. No one argues with him, because everyone knows his weights are never wrong. The craftsmanship behind these weights is another layer of intimacy. Many were made not by anonymous artisans, but by people the weigher knew, cousins, village sculptors, friends who owed a favor. Sometimes the weigher gave specific instructions. Make me a monkey with a broken drum. I want it to say, don't mock those who can't sing. Other times, they let the artist choose, trusting that the result would hold some unknown wisdom they'd need later. It's like commissioning your therapist to design your wedding ring. A strange blend of intimacy and purpose. One particularly powerful story involves a woman named Amasewa, known for using only 3 weights in her entire career. One was a tiny fish, one was a seated elder, and the last, a long stick with a knot at one end. People whispered that she never changed them, never needed more, and somehow always came out ahead in trade. When she died, her weights were buried with her, which was rare, usually weights passed on, but in her case, no one else dared touch them. They belonged to her spirit, the village elders said, and maybe, just maybe, her spirit still checks their weight from time to time. You're handed a weight shaped like an elephant's head and told it was once used only by a chief. Because, the current weigher smirks, an elephant doesn't buy peanuts. You laugh until you realize this isn't just a joke, it's an economic flex. This weight likely saw deals involving land, tribute marriages, maybe even war terms. Holding it, you feel its smooth heft in your hand, and you're not just holding brass, you're holding influence layered across time. The night grows cooler, and someone starts humming an old trader's tune. You can't make out all the words, but you catch the chorus. A weight that lies will fall, a hand that cheats will burn. It's both lullaby and warning. And suddenly you realize, in this world, honesty isn't just a virtue, it's a technique. It's part of the weight's calibration. You don't just balance metal, you balance meaning. A final moment etches itself into your memory. A child, no older than 6, sits cross-legged with a weight in her palm. It's shaped like a bird in mid-flight, and she whispers to it like she's asking for advice. You're not sure what she hears back, but her face softens. She nods, then places it on the mat beside her. She's not playing. She's practicing. She's already learning the language of brass. And you now understand just a bit more of that language too. You close your eyes and imagine your own gold weight. What shape would yours take? A lantern, a book, a quiet sleeping fan. Whatever it is, you hope it whispers wisdom, and maybe just a little sarcasm too. The night deepens, and with it, the hush that settles across the compound thickens like velvet. Somewhere, a mortar thuds rhythmically as someone prepares a late batch of fufu, the sound blending with the buzz of insects and the distant, lazy bark of a village dog that's clearly not interested in catching anything tonight. You stay seated under the mango tree, watching as the gold weighers wrap their weights with slow, practiced care. And it hits you. This isn't just the end of a workday. It's a sacred ritual, a curtain call for little brass actors who have performed 1,000 silent dramas. But what happens when a gold weight breaks? When its corners soften from use or its legs, if it's an animal, snap off from a careless drop? That's the question now dangling before you like a lantern on a swaying rope, and the answer is not what you expect. Because here's the thing, broken weights are never just tossed out like expired groceries. They're treated with something between retirement honor and mystical hesitation. Think gold weight nursing home, but with more incense and fewer bingo nights. You're led to a quiet edge of the village where the old and damaged weights are kept, not buried, not burned, just laid gently in a shallow wooden tray lined with folded Kent cloth. This isn't trash. It's a kind of museum meets mausoleum. And the caretaker, an older woman named Nana Afia who speaks so softly you're not entirely sure whether she's addressing you or the weights themselves. She runs her fingers over a cracked snake weight and mutters, "Still wise, just not strong anymore." This brings us to our historical fact for the evening. Some Ashanti communities believed broken weights held lingering spiritual energy, and to disrespect that was to court misfortune. They might be stored in a family shrine, hidden under floorboards, or placed beside other ancestral items to rest, alongside those who once used them. It's not just a preservation of objects, it's the continuation of relationships. A weigher might still consult a broken weight before a deal, like asking a retired professor for advice they'll pretend not to follow. And here's your quirky gem. There's a well-circulated legend about a monkey-shaped weight that once broken was buried improperly and allegedly caused mischief in the village for months. Missing crops, scales tipping backward. One man claimed the monkey haunted his goat, which, let's be honest, sounds like a convenient excuse for a stubborn animal. But still, the message landed. Respect the weight, even when it's broken. Especially when it's broken. A surprising number of people you meet along the way admit to keeping cracked or chipped weights in small leather pouches, worn around the neck or waist. One woman lets you peek inside hers, a tiny bird missing one wing, wrapped in a scrap of red cloth. "He helps me find good buyers," she says with a sly grin, like you're in on a secret she's only half willing to share. You don't question it. Frankly, after the angry turtle story from last night, you're ready to believe anything with a shiny surface has at least some agenda. Historians still argue whether the practice of retaining broken weights was purely symbolic or part of an older spiritual system. Some think these objects functioned as passive talismans, their power activated by memory and proximity. Others think it's just people being people, attached to what once served them well. After all, you probably still have that mug with a chipped lip or those jeans with the rip you swear makes them luckier. Why should a weight be any different? In one household, a boy eagerly shows you his great-grandfather's retired weights, which he's inherited in a clay pot under his bed. He brings them out with ceremony, as if introducing family members at a reunion. This one was for cola nuts. This was for cloth. This was only used when they didn't trust the buyer. One is almost unrecognizable, its original form melted into something that looks more like a stone than a sculpture. Still, he cradles it with both hands, whispering its nickname under his breath, Old Eye. The reverence is real. The nostalgia, thick enough to chew. There's even a marketplace subculture you hadn't expected. Traders and collectors who seek out damaged weights specifically, not because they're cheaper, though they often are, but because they believe such weights carry stories. One man tells you, while unwrapping a cracked man-with-a-sword figure, that the weight had belonged to a traveling weigher who used it in coastal towns and once had it stolen by a thief who drowned a week later. It came back to me, he says, patting it gently like an obedient pet. You don't ask follow-up questions. The goosebumps say enough. Occasionally, broken weights are ceremonially melted down, not in shame, but in transformation. You watch as one elder carefully places 3 cracked weights into a small crucible. He says a short chant, barely louder than a breeze, and lights the fire. Later, the cooled metal is shaped into a new weight, a leopard this time, and marked subtly with a single groove down its spine. The old one's live inside it now, he says. It's not reincarnation. It's community through metal. You try to imagine a modern equivalent, retiring your old phone by embedding it into the shell of your new one, burying your expired credit card in a velvet box beside your childhood stuffed animal. Not quite the same, but the urge to preserve, to revere, to hold close what once helped us move through the world feels achingly familiar. Back at the tray of broken weights, Nana Afia invites you to sit. She picks up one shaped like a man pounding yam, its arm broken off clean at the elbow, and places it gently into your palm. Still good, she murmurs. Not for measuring, but for remembering, and you sit there, palm warm from the brass, the stars bright above you, wondering what this little weight has seen. How many hands it passed through, what truths it enforced, what lies it caught in the balance. The broken are never useless here, they are wise, they are witnesses, and sometimes they are waiting, not to be whole again, but to be heard one last time. A pale pink dawn starts to tease the edges of the sky, and a single bird, braver or maybe more confused than the rest, lets out a test chirp like it's auditioning for sunrise. You're still with the gold weights, or maybe they are with you now, clinging to your thoughts the way brass clings to fingerprints. Today, your path takes you past the traders and elders and straight into the world of the artists. The sculptors, the casters, the dreamers with sooty fingers and imaginations as molten as the fires they work beside. Because while gold weights are tools and talismans and tiny moral billboards, they are also, unmistakably, art. Your sandals crunch softly on packed earth as you approach a low, smoke-smudged workshop. Inside, a man named Kojo is bent over a tiny mold, squinting with the kind of concentration that might also cure diseases if it could be bottled. He waves you in without looking up. The room smells like clay, ash, and ambition. You're about to witness the famous lost wax casting process, an ancient method still alive and well in places like this, where time knows better than to rush beauty. Here's your historical nugget to nibble on. The Ashanti gold weights were primarily made using the lost wax casting method, a technique believed to have reached the region via trade with North Africa long before Europe even remembered to wash its hands after meals. Each weight starts with a beeswax model, shaped meticulously by hand, then coated with layers of fine clay. The whole thing is fired so the wax melts out, leaving a hollow mold that's then filled with molten brass. Once cooled, the clay shell is broken away, revealing the final sculpture. And just like that, you've got a one-of-a-kind miniature masterpiece. The cool part, every single weight is unique. Even two turtle weights cast by the same artist will have different shell patterns or eye slants or tail wags. That's not sloppiness, it's intention. These weren't factory widgets. They were fingerprints in metal. You peer over Kojo's shoulder and watch as he smooths the wax figure of a man holding a gourd. He's a proverb, Kojo mutters. He says, "Don't drink deeply from a borrowed bowl." You nod solemnly, while mentally applying that to every group project you ever got stuck in. But the fun lies in the fringes. Because for every weight shaped like a noble animal or moral figure, there are others that wander boldly into the surreal. A crab with human feet, a fish smoking a pipe, a stool with wings. These whimsical sculptures weren't mistakes, they were commentary, humor, satire, little brass side-eyes aimed at hypocrites and braggarts. Historians still argue whether these weirder weights were meant to be read literally or symbolically. Was the pipe-smoking fish a dig at lazy fishermen, a metaphor for vanity, or just someone showing off their sculpting skills after too much palm wine? Nobody knows for sure, but Kojo laughs when you ask. Maybe all three, he shrugs. Maybe just art. There's a quiet rebellion in these creations. You see it in the weight shaped like a man with his hand permanently stuck in a pot, clearly caught stealing. In the weight that shows a woman carrying an enormous basket while a man naps under a tree, social critique in sculpture form. These artists weren't just decorators. They were philosophers in bronze, social critics with kilns. You begin to realize that while traders told stories through trade, the casters told stories through flame. Their audience, anyone observant enough to listen. Kojo invites you to try your hand at sculpting a wax figure. You nervously knead the sticky substance between your fingers. It's warm and soft like chewed gum, but somehow noble feeling. You attempt a bird, but end up with something that looks like a sad boot. Kojo pats your shoulder gently. He says, "Even ugly wings can fly." You're not sure if he's teasing you or crafting a new proverb on the spot, but either way, you're honored. The wax goes into a small clay mold that you get to write your name on. If it survives, Kojo says, it belongs to you. If it doesn't, then the fire didn't want it. Later, you sit beneath a palm frond roof and watch another artist named Abina paint her wax figures with delicate herbal oils before casting. She says it calms the spirits within the metal. Her father taught her that some wax figures complain if not cooled properly, and that a whistling sound from a mold means the sculpture doesn't want to be born yet. You raise an eyebrow, and she just smiles. You don't argue with wax, she says, and goes back to her work. There's also the matter of signature styles. You learn that certain families or guilds had distinctive flair, curved legs, pointed snouts, zigzag eyebrows. An expert could tell a weight's origin just by its style. You see a particularly sleek elephant with exaggerated ears, and Kojo says, "Ah, that's Eku's work. He made ears like soup ladles." Said it helped the elephant hear the lies better. It's moments like these when you stop seeing the weights as historical artifacts and start seeing them as whispers from clever, flame-taming minds. One of your favorite discoveries comes when you notice a cracked, leather-bound book under Kojo's bench. It's full of sketches, weight ideas that never made it to brass. A woman riding a crocodile, a boy offering a snail to a chief, a pair of fighting birds with their wings tied together. It's a weight maker's dream journal, and it's magic. Kojo catches you admiring it and says, "Some dreams are too heavy to cast." You believe him. Later, a group of apprentice artists gather around a small fire, passing a pot of warm millet drink and trading casting disasters. One recalls a mold that exploded and left a snake weight with 3 heads. Another swears he once cast a lion that came out with human teeth. "It looked too eager," he says with a shiver. You laugh with them, feeling like you're inside a secret society whose password is "Don't trust brass birds with narrow eyes." Before you leave, Kojo presents you with your finished piece. Miraculously, it survived the casting. It still looks like a sad boot, but now it gleams with an otherworldly gold-brown sheen. He places it in your palm and nods. Now you have your own proverb. You smile, trying to imagine what it could possibly mean. Even the boot walks when the dream is strong enough. And maybe you'll workshop it. You walk away from the workshop with your new treasure nestled safely in your pocket. The day has only just begun, but your thoughts are already echoing with fire and wax, melted meaning, and tiny sculptures that speak without mouths. You don't just admire gold weights anymore. You hear them. The sun climbs higher now, nudging shadows into sharper angles and turning every brass weight you've seen into a glimmering, half-blinding mystery. You find yourself drawn back to the market, not to shop, but to listen. Not with your ears exactly, but with that inner sense that notices a hush beneath chatter, a rhythm beneath footsteps. Today, the weights aren't just objects or symbols or artworks. They're part of a larger symphony. And like any good song, they need a conductor, or, in this case, a negotiator. You trail behind a silver-tongued trader named Kwaku, whose swagger suggests he's got more friends in the spirit world than the living one. He carries a small leather pouch at his hip. Inside, 5 gold weights, each as worn and shiny as a bar of soap left out too long. When you ask why he only uses 5, he smiles without showing teeth. "Because I don't need to lie," he says. You're not sure if that's wisdom or a subtle threat. Either way, you stay close. Kwaku is part of an ancient game, one older than money, older than coins. He's a player in the delicate ballet of negotiation by weight. And here's your historical nugget. Before colonial currencies shuffled in with their bills and bank stamps, the Ashanti economy flowed through measured gold dust, exchanged in careful, glittering pinches. The gold weights were the referees of that process, ensuring no one got cheated, and everyone walked away pretending they were slightly smarter than the other. You watch as Kwaku lays out his weights and scale with a flourish that would make a magician jealous. He's selling woven cloth, and the buyer, a stern-faced woman with arms like tree trunks, narrows her eyes at the dust he pours into the pan. It's like a staring contest with brass referees silently judging both sides. The scale tilts. The woman frowns. Kwaku adds a whisper more dust. The scale balances like a sigh. They both nod, and the deal is sealed without a single coin changing hands. But here's where it gets fascinating, and where historians still argue whether the entire practice was a rigid science or a polite illusion. Because, truth be told, scales weren't always exact. A humid morning, a sneaky nudge, a weight just slightly shaved by a clever hand, all these could swing a deal. It wasn't just math. It was theater. And the best actors knew how to tilt the scene just enough without tipping into scandal. Some traders developed signature moves, subtle gestures with their fingers, placement of a weight at a certain angle, even short poems recited during measuring, as if words could distract the buyer long enough for the scale to whisper its own desires. Kwaku has a favorite proverb he murmurs while measuring. The leopard does not count its spots before it hunts. Is it relevant? Debatable? Is it distracting? Absolutely. And then there's the fringe detail you didn't expect. Some traders believed that certain weights had temperaments. They swore a specific turtle would always tip in favor of the owner, while a lion weight needed to be cooled with water before use, or it would bite the profit. You witness this firsthand when Kwaku wipes his smallest weight with palm oil before use. He's greedy, he mutters. The oil reminds him to behave. You try not to laugh, but the seriousness in his tone makes it hard. In one corner of the market, you spot a younger trader new to the scene, a little too confident, fiddling with a weight that doesn't belong to him. It's older, cracked along the edge, and missing its usual partner. Kwaku watches silently, then leans in to whisper, he doesn't know the weight is from the river. You blink. River, he nods. Sometimes weights are found in the water, lost in trade, or tossed to end a curse. You don't use those unless you know their story. Otherwise, your numbers won't ever add up. That's when it dawns on you trade in this world wasn't just about goods, it was about stories. Every transaction was a narrative. Each party brought their memory, their reputation, and their relationship with their tools to the table. Even the waits had reputations. "Oh, that's Abina's bird," someone might whisper. "She used that when she bought her husband." Wait, bought her husband? Long story, ask me later. In another stall, a trader has laid out 35 weights on a patterned cloth, forming a kind of constellation. Each one has a tiny tag tied to it with thin red thread. "They're not for sale," he says, "they're references." Every client gets measured against their own record, he explains. No one gets the same weight twice unless they've earned it. You realize that gold weights, in this context, were memory devices, personalized measurement systems that told not just how much, but who. There's even a kind of psychological play at work. Some traders believed using a heavier, more dominant-looking weight at the beginning of a deal made the buyer more likely to agree to a final price, even if the numbers were identical. It's like starting a conversation in all caps. You can't argue with a lion sitting in the left pan. Or, well, you can, but you'll lose before your lips part. Kwaku tells you about a legendary trader, a woman known only as Mother Feather, who was said to use weights shaped like clouds, birds, and wind. None of her customers could explain how they felt after buying from her, only that they had never been so satisfied or so unsure of what had just happened. Her weights, uncatalogued. Her secrets, gone with her funeral smoke. But every once in a while, someone claims to have found one of her pieces. Light as air, heavy with charm. Toward the end of the day, you try your hand at a mock negotiation. Kwaku gives you a set of borrowed weights and tells you to sell a handful of dried okra. Your opponent, a 7-year-old girl with dimples and a terrifying poker face. You balance, pour, adjust. She crosses her arms. You recite a proverb, she blinks. You add a final dusting of gold and watch the scale settle. She considers, then nods. Acceptable. Kwaku claps once, grinning. You live another day. As you walk away, a thought lingers. This world of negotiation, of weighted storytelling, of silent agreements shaped in brass, it's more than economic exchange. It's a dance of minds, memories, and small metal mirrors held up to human nature. In every deal, there's a hint of mischief, a dash of truth, and the enduring hope that the scale eventually will balance in your favor. You wake the next morning to the smell of charcoal smoke and roasted plantain, the sun sliding lazily across your skin like it's still debating whether it wants to rise or roll over. Somewhere a rooster coughs out its opinion on the matter, and a child laughs at nothing in particular. You stretch, bones clicking like old gold weights being sorted, and remember where you are, and where you still have to go. Because while you've seen how these tiny weights shape markets, now it's time to understand how they shape people. Specifically, how they shape identity. You follow the morning sounds to a quiet courtyard where an elder named Nana Ajoa is weaving a story out loud, her fingers dancing over a handful of weights like she's shuffling a deck of metallic tarot cards. She looks up at you with a grin that has probably silenced dozens of gossipers and at least one stubborn goat. "Sit," she says. "You need ears more than legs today." She explains that gold weights weren't just about measuring gold. They were about measuring reputation. See, among the Ashanti, a person's character was their most valuable currency. And just like gold dust had to be weighed and verified, so too did a person's deeds. The weights acted as tiny, tangible reflections of that identity, tools that reminded you who you were or who you claimed to be. Here's your historical anchor. Certain families passed gold weights down through generations, not as tools, but as heritage. Each weight carried a proverb, a warning, or a lesson that had helped someone survive something, or someone. Imagine inheriting your great-grandmother's brass monkey, knowing it meant, the one who climbs loudly gets noticed by the hunter. Not exactly embroidered pillow advice, but still pretty sound. These heirloom weights weren't bartering items, they were identity markers, almost like philosophical family crests. And the fringe fact, Some families stored entire autobiographies in gold weights. Each figure stood for a moment. A war won, a betrayal survived, a chiefdom gained or lost. There are rumors of traders who carried over 100 weights and never sold a single one. Not because they were hoarders, but because the weights were them. They were the soul in brass form. One tale tells of a woman named Efua the Quiet, who never spoke above a whisper, but whose weights told stories of outwitting thieves, saving children, and turning an entire village's fortune around. When she died, her collection was buried with her by request. Let the ground remember, she'd said. You glance down at a weight shaped like a lizard with 2 tails. Nana Ajoa taps it and says, "That's for people who pretend to be helpful but have other plans." Then she nudges one shaped like a hornbill. "This one means you speak only when it matters. Very rare, that one." She picks up a 3rd weight shaped like a stool with a crack in it and gives you a long look. "This," she says, "is for people who rush to sit on power they don't understand." You try to look deeply thoughtful, but she smirks like she knows you're just remembering the last group chat meltdown you tried to moderate. Scholars still argue whether gold weights ever functioned like ID cards, literal symbols of a person's social position or reputation that others recognized instantly. There's no official record of this, but the oral histories suggest something close. At the very least, showing up to a negotiation with a crocodile weight that used to belong to a war hero could shift the mood in your favor. Prestige, like gold, shines brightest in the right hands. Identity wasn't just individual, though it was also communal. Guilds, clans, even entire regions had signature weights or styles. Some preferred bold, angular designs. Others leaned towards soft, rounded figures. One village might love birds and fish, while another stuck to humans and tools. These stylistic fingerprints meant that even if you didn't know someone personally, you could tell where they came from and what they stood for based on their weights. It's like showing up at a party wearing your hometown's entire mythology as jewelry. Subtle? Not really. Effective? Absolutely. You learn about silent weights. One's deliberately vague in shape but heavy with meaning among insiders. For example, a lumpish, abstract weight might not look like much to you, but to members of a secret society, it screamed. This person once took the vow of the river oath and lived to tell it. These were the QR codes of their time, cryptic until you knew the code. A quiet way of saying, "I've seen things." You can't help but want one. Later, you meet a young artist named Kwesi who's forging a new style of weights, not for trade, but for storytelling theater. His troupe performs folk tales using giant replicas of gold weights, each character represented by a piece: the sly fox, the foolish chief, the loyal hen. The weights are moved across a cloth stage like chess pieces while the actors chant and drum. The audience laughs, gasps, occasionally yells advice. "We're recoding the old language," Kwesi tells you, making our ancestors' metaphors into motion. You watch, mesmerized, as the fox weight outwits everyone by pretending to be slow. Classic fox move. And of course, not all identity linked to weights was earned. Some people used impressive, elaborate weights to bluff social rank. The equivalent of rolling up to a community council meeting in a sports car you definitely can't afford. There were always those who hoped shiny brass could make up for shady pasts. And just like today, some people fell for the performance, while others saw right through it and muttered, "That lion has the teeth of a kitten." Before you leave Nana Ajoa's courtyard, she presses a simple weight into your palm. It's shaped like an open hand. "This one's for remembering," she says. Open hand, open heart, open ears. Keep it with you. Not for measuring things, but for measuring yourself. You nod, unsure if you deserve it, but grateful all the same. You can feel the cool metal warming slowly in your grip, like it's choosing you right back. As you walk away, the breeze carries the soft rustle of leaves and a distant drumbeat. You begin to understand that gold weights aren't just things, they are reflections. They don't just weigh dust. They weigh meaning. They remind you again and again that value isn't always what glitters in the pan. Sometimes it's what glows in your memory or your palm. The road curls now like a lazy serpent through the forest, each step softer, quieter, until the sounds of the market are just a faint echo in the leaves behind you. Ahead lies a clearing ringed by trees older than any story you've heard so far. You're not here for a transaction, a proverb, or even a sculpture. You're here for a secret, the kind that doesn't show up in textbooks and only whispers its truth when you've proven you'll listen without interrupting. At the center of this glade sits a low building with walls made from mud and stone, its roof layered with thatch and age. Smoke curls lazily from a corner chimney, and inside, the air smells of iron, sweat, and time. This is the forge of Kojo Mensa, one of the last living Abrafo, not just a smith, but a weight maker trusted with the hidden grammar of form and spirit. And today, for reasons you're not quite clear on, he's agreed to show you something no outsider usually sees. The ritual of secret weight making. You step inside, and Kojo doesn't greet you so much as glance, nod, and keep working. He's a man shaped like the anvils he hammers, wide, solid, full of quiet danger. The forge blazes as he melts brass in a clay crucible, stirring with a curved piece of horn. At his feet lie small molds of stone and clay, some with patterns you recognize, lizards, stools, birds, but others you don't. One looks like a twisted rope. Another, like an eye with no pupil. You ask him what that one means. He shrugs. Depends on who's asking. Here's your historical fact. While many weights were cast in public made by guild artisans using standard molds, some were crafted in private for specific individuals, families, or rituals. These were the Adumire weights, known only to their owners and sometimes believed to carry spirits within them. Unlike the common figures used for trade, these weren't meant to weigh gold. They were meant to weigh truth. Kojo explains this in slow, gravelly words, in between hammer strikes. A weight can hold more than metal, he says. If you make it the right way at the right time, it holds memory, it holds name. You ask what that means, and he only smirks like someone who's seen too much and said too little for too long. But then he points to a set of 7 weights on a shelf, each one shaped like a phase of the moon. That was for a midwife. She wanted to measure how long someone had before a difficult birth. Not in time, in strength. You blink. Weight measures strength with a moon weight. Not the muscle kind, Kojo corrects. The spirit kind, how much they could take before they broke. Fringe detail unlocked. Some gold weights weren't used to weigh gold at all. They were metaphysical gauges, designed to measure intangible qualities, courage, loyalty, grief. One oral account even describes a weight made for a widow who wanted to know when her mourning had reached balance with her healing. Historians still argue whether such uses were symbolic or literal. But then again, when your worldview sees spirit and matter as deeply entangled, the line between symbol and tool gets pretty blurry. You ask to try making one, and Kojo raises an eyebrow. Only if you choose something worth measuring, he says. After a moment, you whisper, regret. He nods slowly. Tricky one. He guides you through the steps, mixing the clay, pressing it into the carved mold, heating the brass, pouring the liquid metal like honey into a shape that almost recoils from it. Regret needs a twist, he mutters. It doesn't sit straight. As the mold cools, he wraps it in soaked palm fronds and smudges it with ash. This seals the memory. Without the ash, it forgets what it was made for. You're not entirely sure if he's teasing you, but you don't ask twice. Later, he opens a wooden chest and reveals a collection unlike anything you've seen. A drum, a snake biting its own tail, a cracked egg, a weight shaped like 2 faces looking away from each other. This one's for people who live in denial, he says. Can't see the truth even if it's dancing in front of them wearing a hat. You can't help but laugh, even as a small chill climbs your spine. Some of these weights, Kojo tells you, were never meant to be sold or even seen. They were buried with people, placed in sacred groves, or hidden in walls. one, he says, was made to hold the name of a child who wouldn't live past their 5th rainy season. The family never used it, just kept it in a bowl of ash, whispering prayers to it every week. Sometimes the weight keeps the memory from sinking too deep, he says quietly. You look at the small object, shaped like a fallen seed, and you don't speak for a long time. And then, just when you think you've reached the emotional limit of what a few ounces of brass can carry, Kojo shows you something wrapped in leopard skin. He unwraps it slowly, reverently, revealing a weight shaped like a broken chain. This, he says, was made when a man returned home after slavery. He didn't want to forget, but he didn't want to remember alone either, so he made this. The weight was never used for trade. It just sat on his family's altar for generations, a constant, quiet witness. Kojo sighs, stretches, and begins packing up for the evening. The forge dims. The crickets outside begin their choir practice. He hands you the cooled mold of your regret weight. It's small, slightly crooked, and oddly beautiful. Keep it, he says. Use it if you ever need to know how heavy the past still is. You nod, the cool brass surprisingly warm in your palm. As you step out of the forge, the air feels different. Heavier, maybe, or just more honest. You walk back through the trees, the weight tucked safely in your pocket, and feel like you've just been handed a secret not everyone wants, but everyone eventually needs. A tool not for measuring gold, but for measuring what can't be bought and never really leaves you. You wake the next morning in a village where time seems to move sideways, where the roosters crow late and the breeze insists on telling stories of its own. The small weight of regret you crafted last night presses lightly against your chest from inside your pouch, reminding you that memory doesn't need a loud voice to be heard. Today, you're headed somewhere different, toward the spaces where gold weights get weird, where their meanings shift, warp, and occasionally laugh at you. The path leads to an old trading outpost turned museum turned gossip center, unofficially known as the House of Misfits. It's not marked on any map, but everyone you ask raises an eyebrow and points vaguely toward the hills, as if the place is both sacred and slightly embarrassing. You follow the trail through wild cassava and tangled vines, until it opens into a circular courtyard littered with half-buried sculptures and weights too odd to explain in polite company. A woman with a red headwrap greets you at the gate, her face a map of expressions that change faster than your Wi-Fi signal. I'm Acua, she says. And yes, they're real. Come in. She waves you through what appears to be a doorway shaped like a laughing monkey. Classic start. Inside, you're met with a collection that immediately challenges everything you thought you knew about gold weights. Here's your historical anchor. While the standard canon of Ashanti gold weights focuses on geometric and symbolic figures used in trade and storytelling, there exists a whole subcategory of anomalous weights, pieces that seem to defy the logic, symmetry, or even the dignity of the rest. Scholars sometimes call them esoteric weights. Locals tend to call them the misbehaviors. One shelf is filled with tiny brass figures mid-fall. Humans tripping, birds flying upside down, monkeys riding goats backward. You point to one and raise an eyebrow. Acua chuckles. That's the you talk too much weight. It shows a man whose jaw has fallen off because he couldn't stop gossiping. You lean in closer. Yep, that's definitely a detached jaw right there in gleaming brass. Fringe detail time. Among the oral traditions, some of these weights were said to be crafted as social punishments, tiny, durable forms of public shaming. Instead of writing down someone's offense, a blacksmith might make a mocking weight and pass it around town until the lesson stuck. The offender rarely got a direct accusation, but let's just say the hint was not subtle. Imagine living in a village where someone crafts a brass chicken with your exact haircut and a suspiciously guilty-looking expression. Historians still argue whether these weights served any formal justice role, but their sting certainly lingered. You move to another corner where the weights take a more surreal turn, shapes that aren't quite animals, aren't quite humans. One resembles a fish wearing a crown. Another, a human figure with 5 eyes and no mouth. Dream weights, Acua says, made after visions, the kind people have when they eat the wrong mushrooms or get visited by ancestors who talk sideways. You laugh, then pause. Were they used? She nods slowly. Sometimes, usually in divination or personal rituals. Not for trade. You don't weigh cocoa beans on a weight shaped like a ghost with a tambourine. She leads you to a locked cabinet, produces a key from her ankle bracelet, and opens it to reveal a single velvet-lined tray. Inside rests a weight shaped like a coiled snake eating its tail, Ouroboros style. Except the snake has human teeth. You flinch slightly. That one's from the north, she says, made by a smith who was exiled. They say he made it to mock a corrupt chief who devoured his own kingdom. It was confiscated after the chief saw it and exploded in rage. No surprise there. You're beginning to realize something important. While many gold weights follow specific symbolic traditions, visual proverbs, clan emblems, or spiritual guides, there was also room for rebellion. Some gold weights didn't obey. They didn't explain. They provoked, teased, or whispered secrets that only their makers understood. These were weights made by artists, not just artisans, who couldn't help but smuggle their strangeness into a world of measurements and expectations. You ask Acua if people still make weird weights today. She smiles and shows you a small box filled with new pieces by modern blacksmiths. One is a smartphone with vines growing out of it. Another is a woman with a megaphone for a head. We're still telling stories, she says. They just wear new skins. Some of the pieces even mix old and new. A traditional geometric weight fused to a tiny car, or a double crocodile riding a skateboard. They're beautiful and deeply confusing. In the best way, you sit for a while in the courtyard, sipping ginger tea and watching birds argue in a neem tree, your head full of brass oddities and inverted meanings. The misfit weights haven't just entertained you. They've reminded you that the world isn't always neat, and neither are the truths worth remembering. Sometimes the message isn't clean or symmetrical. It's ridiculous, lopsided, even a little rude. And still true. As the sun begins to dip, Acua hands you a parting gift, a small weight shaped like an open book with legs. This one's called The More You Know, the Weirder It Gets, she says with a grin. You laugh, tuck it into your pouch next to the weight of regret, and wonder what kind of currency you're collecting on this journey. Not gold, but something that gleams just the same in the right kind of light. You leave the house of misfits as the sky purples into evening, your path lit by fireflies, and the occasional mental image of a monkey riding a goat backward into philosophical sunset. You realize the weights you've seen today weren't made for markets. They were made for mirrors, not to measure what others have, but to reflect the contradictions you carry inside. The road winds lower now, past moss-covered stones and tree roots gnarled like old fingers reaching across the path. And your steps feel quieter, not from caution, but from something else. A kind of reverence, maybe. You're heading to a place where weights are no longer just measured by mass or meaning, but by silence. The village elder said it best. To understand the final truth of gold weights, you have to visit the ones we don't speak of out loud. So here you are, following the whisper of that idea toward the forest shrine known simply as Domafo, or those who do not forget. There's no signpost, just a narrow trail flanked by thick bamboo, and soon the sounds of people fade entirely. The air shifts. Cooler, denser. You reach a clearing where carved wooden totems stand in rings like guardians. At the center is a low platform made of stone, smoothed by time and something else, hands maybe, or ritual. You've arrived at one of the sacred sites where gold weights become memory anchors. Not trade tools, not art, but vessels for remembering what cannot be spoken. A quiet figure in a wrap of woven bark cloth greets you without a word. They don't offer a name. Just gesture for you to sit, then begin arranging small objects on the stone platform. At first, you assume they're regular weights. You've seen plenty by now, but then the figure tilts one and it rattles. Inside, something loose like seeds or pebbles. You lean closer. These are memory weights, hollowed and sealed, often with items hidden inside ashes, hair, scraps of cloth, even teeth. Fringe detail unlocked. The figure finally speaks in a low murmur. Some memories are too big for stories. They need form, mass, shape. You feel that sentence settle into you like a smooth stone in deep water. Here's your mainstream fact. While most gold weights were used in commerce, some were repurposed for ancestral remembrance, especially when physical mementos weren't permitted or had decayed. In these cases, families commissioned weights to represent entire lives, sealed with tokens to preserve the essence of a person. These were never used in trade again. They were part of funeral rites, often kept on family altars or buried with the dead. You watch as the figure places one shaped like a broken drum beside another shaped like a closed mouth. A drummer who died during a morning ban, they explain. He wasn't allowed to play at his own mother's funeral. His family made these instead. It's not hard to feel the ache locked inside those shapes. You ask if each one has a story. The figure doesn't answer, just gently taps a weight shaped like a stool with a crack down the middle. Some stories were never spoken, only carried. Historians still argue whether these hollowed weights were symbolic or literal. Did people believe the essence of the deceased was trapped inside, or were the tokens meant only as a focus for memory? But you sense that here, such debates are irrelevant. The truth isn't in the explanation. It's in the silence that falls as the weight is set down, in the way the figure pauses after each name is spoken or not spoken, like they're waiting for the memory to settle back into its brass skin. One weight catches your eye, a simple sphere with no decoration, only a faint line where two halves were joined. You ask what's inside. The figure smiles faintly. Whatever was left, you press, asking if it belonged to someone in particular. Yes, they say. Everyone. That's not ominous at all. But as you hold the weight in your palm, you feel a strange warmth, as if it remembers hands before yours, hundreds of them. And somehow you're part of that now. They show you how to read a memory weight, not with scales or measurements, but by feel, its balance, its sound, even its temperature. Some feel colder after certain dreams. The figure whispers. You ask what happens if you open one, they go still. Some have tried, but once the seal is broken, the memory forgets its shape, and something always leaves, not always the part you want. Right, noted, no amateur archaeology today. You're invited to leave something behind as part of the exchange. You choose the odd little laughing book weight Acua gave you, unsure why, but it feels right. The figure accepts it, then presses into your hand a different one, a weight shaped like an ear with a vine growing through it. You listen, they say. So now you carry. You nod, slowly understanding that listening is its own form of inheritance, and sometimes the heaviest things we carry are not ours, but we hold them anyway. As you prepare to leave, the figure offers one final insight. These weights are not for buying or selling, they are for holding still what would otherwise vanish. You look around the clearing, now lit by soft evening light, the totems casting long shadows across the platform. You realize each shape, each glint of brass, is a refusal to let memory evaporate. A quiet defiance against forgetting. As you step back onto the trail, the forest seems to exhale. The weight in your pouch presses against your hip, a new presence, not yours but entrusted to you all the same. You walk slowly, the silence still echoing in your chest. You've seen gold weights used in markets, in stories, in rebellion, in shame. But here they are monuments, not to wealth, but to loss, and to the radical, tender act of remembering anyway. You wake to the sound of rustling leaves, but it's not the wind. It's a marketplace coming to life, just beyond the bend in the road. Not the kind with plastic packaging or automated checkout beeps, but the old kind. With cowrie shells clicking in sacks, goats making their opinions known loudly, and human voices that rise and fall like ocean tides. You're in Kejisha, or rather, what remains of it in this recreated form. Traders call it a heritage market, but it's less museum, more memory. And here, for the first time in your journey, you'll try to use a gold weight. You've carried so many now, mocking ones, sacred ones, ancestral ones. But in Kedjisha, you're about to find out what it feels like to actually measure something with one. A man named Kojo waves you over to a stall lined with little clay pots and carved calabashes. First-time buyer, he asks, grinning, you nod. Well, you're gonna mess it up. But that's tradition. He hands you a brass balance scale and gestures at the tiny weights laid out beside it. Today's mainstream historical fact. The Akin gold trade operated on an extraordinarily standardized system of weights, with strict unit values, Abramu, Esser, and Edwin among them, each weight precisely crafted and named, forming a hierarchical set. These allowed for intricate pricing of goods and were so trusted that deals worth entire fortunes were conducted with barely a word exchanged. Of course, the system only worked because people agreed to believe in it. Funny how that sounds familiar. Kojo shows you how to line the weights up. Place a measure of shea butter on one side, the gold dust on the other. When the beam levels out, you've got a match. Except you're trying to trade a carved spoon for 2 roasted plantains, and that math gets fuzzy fast. You're doing it the old way, Kojo says. No calculators, just vibes and centuries of practice. Your first attempt tips wildly. Your second overpays. Your third, just right. You trade, eat, and for a moment, you're not just watching the past. You're part of its equation. Here's where it gets quirky. Some vendors still refuse to use any other system. Even today, in back market transactions, gold weights are occasionally pulled out, not for actual gold, but as a way to legitimize the trade. If you measure with brass, Kojo says, people think you know what you're doing, even if you don't. It's a performance, sure, but a powerful one. The ceremony of precision, of weighing something carefully, has a kind of magic to it. A ritual that says, this matters. Nearby, a woman hawks spices measured by weight, literal spice weighed against a tiny brass crocodile. Another sells amulets, each one balanced against a pair of coiled snakes. You ask what she trades for, she lifts a brow. Not gold. Memory. You give me a story, I give you a charm. You pause, then tell her about the Irwitha weight from the shrine. She listens, nods, and gives you a charm shaped like a small, sleeping face. Helps you forget just enough, she says. You don't ask what. You're not sure you want to know. As the day rolls on, you start to see how gold weights weren't just about exchange. They were about trust. A shared system, yes, but also a deeply personal one. People chose certain weights to carry not just because of what they measured, but because of who had touched them. I only use my uncle's weights, one vendor says. He never cheated anyone, his name's still in them. There it is again, that idea that objects remember, not in bytes or cloud drives, but in shape, feel, wear. Historians still argue whether the trust in gold weights came from cultural enforcement or spiritual belief. Was it societal pressure that kept weights honest, or did people truly believe divine punishment followed those who tampered with them? Kojo shrugs when you ask. Maybe both, he says. But mostly, it's your own sleep you lose if your weight lies. Oof, that hits deeper than expected. You're invited to weigh something else now, not goods, but intentions. A ritual stall near the end of the market offers future measures. You're told to place a gold weight, anyone you've carried, on one side of the scale and on the other a token representing something you want. You choose the laughing book weight again. On the other side, you place a single brass ring from your pouch. The vendor, an old woman with silvery lashes, watches as the scale dips, then slowly balances. You've already started, she says. Now you just have to keep reading. Whatever that means. You leave the market at sunset, pockets a little lighter, heart a little fuller. You've finally experienced the core truth of gold weights, not just their shapes or their stories, but their function. They don't just tell tales. They create an interaction between people that requires attention, honesty, even vulnerability. There's something almost sacred in that. As the road narrows again and the scent of roasting cassava fades behind you, you realize something has shifted. You're not just a traveler anymore. You're a participant in the grammar of the gold weight. You've measured and been measured. You've given and received. And in doing so, you've taken your place in a lineage that spans traders, blacksmiths, thieves, mourners, jokesters, rebels, and dreamers. You rest under a tree that night, listening to crickets and feeling the warmth of the ring in your pocket and the brass in your pouch. There's one last place to go, one final weight to understand. But for now, the only thing you need to balance is your breath. In, out, even steady, like a scale finding its center again. Morning drips in slowly, like honey from the edge of a spoon. It's your final stretch now, but not the kind that races toward an ending. No, this part slows you down, draws you inward, like the last note of a lullaby, hanging in the air before silence. You're headed to the house of last waits, a quiet little structure on a hill just outside Kumasi. It's not open to the public on most days. Not unless someone whispers your name at the door and the wind happens to nod. The building looks plain enough, mud brick, low roof, shade trees hanging like lazy guards. But the energy here is thick, like standing in the middle of someone else's memory. A woman with a brass pendant greets you with a smile that seems both brand new and ancient. "Welcome to where the waits come to rest," she says, "and sometimes to wait." You follow her in. The room is dim and smells faintly of camphor and beeswax. Shelves line the walls, each one holding rows and rows of gold weights. But these are different. No two are alike here. Each one has a tag made of folded parchment, tied with dyed string. The woman explains, "These are the unclaimed, the unpaired, the ones whose stories never made it back home." You kneel before one shaped like a bird missing its beak, another shaped like a half-built house. Each form seems to reach out with an unfinished sentence. You run your fingers gently over the brass. It's smoother than you expect. Worn not by use, but by waiting. Here's your mainstream fact to hold onto. Many gold weights were lost during colonial disruptions, confiscated, stolen, traded under duress, or left behind in hurried migrations. Some ended up in European museums, mislabeled as curios. Others were smelted down. But some were gathered by those who knew what they really were, carried quietly from village to village until they found this place. "We don't restore them," the woman says. "We listen to them." In a corner, you find a shelf labeled simply "Not Yet." The tags here are blank. You ask what they're waiting for. She shrugs. Some truths haven't been remembered yet, but they will. There's something haunting in that idea, that these tiny weights might one day be recognized by a descendant, or even a dreamer like you. That someone someday might finish the story they were forged to tell. The quirky twist: this house operates on a peculiar belief that some gold weights choose not to be found. "We had one shaped like a tortoise disappear for a decade," she says. "Then it showed up in a traveler's pocket 2 continents away, said it fell out of the lining during a thunderstorm." You raise an eyebrow, she just shrugs again. They know where they're needed. She invites you to leave behind any weight you feel no longer belongs to you. You hesitate, fingers tracing the vine-wrapped ear you were given back in the shrine. But no, that one's yours now. Instead, you place the tiny ring weight, the one used in the market ritual, on an open space of the shelf. You don't know why. It just feels like the story has settled. And some things, when finished, want to rest. Historians still argue whether places like this existed traditionally. Repositories for spiritual gold weights, forgotten tokens, unfinished stories. Some claim it's a modern invention with old trappings. Others insist oral records mention return houses for memory objects. But the truth doesn't seem to mind either way. The truth here lies in the stillness, in the weight of each brass piece, in the unspoken invitation to remember, even if you don't yet know what. You take one final walk around the room, noticing shapes you've never seen before. A 3-legged stool balanced on a snake's back. A laughing fish eating a coin. A hut made of palm fronds with an open door. Every weight whispers something. Not a full tale, just the first line, and somehow that's enough. You step outside and the light has softened, cloud-filtered, golden and slow. At the base of the hill, someone has carved words into a stone. To measure is to remember. To remember is to keep alive. You sit beside it, letting your breathing match the rhythm of those ideas. Your journey through the secret lives of Ashanti gold weighers has been heavy, but never burdened. Each weight carried something: truth, laughter, warning, loss, hope. And now that you've listened, you'll carry them too. In your pouch, you still have one weight you've never asked about. A plain cube with a small dot on each face. It never fit anywhere, never matched a system, but you keep it anyway. Maybe it's your own story waiting to be told. Maybe it's not ready yet, or maybe it's just there to remind you that not everything has to be measured to matter. Sometimes it's enough just to hold the shape of what was. Now, let's ease the story into sleep with one final hush. You lie back beneath a sky softened by dusk. The clouds drift like ancient cloth, woven thick with stories and breaths long spent. Somewhere, a drum taps faintly in the distance, not asking for attention, just marking time. You close your eyes. In the dark behind them, you still see brass glints, the laughing face, the broken stool, the hollow bird. Shapes with meanings that flutter like moths, just out of reach. You feel the ground beneath you. Solid, unmoving, a scale in its own way, and you just enough to tip it towards stillness. The weights you've seen, so many of them, each told you something about balance, about memory, about how we decide what matters and what gets left behind. But now you understand that maybe we're all just weights, gold or not, measured not by value, but by the space we take up in someone else's story, and by the care with which we're carried. Breathe in slowly, hold it, let it out even slower. Feel your shoulders soften, the corners of your thoughts unwind. Let the gold weights slip from your grasp just for now. They'll wait, that's what they're best at. Waiting patiently for hands that understand them, or at least try to. You hear a voice, you're not sure whose, murmuring one last proverb. When the scale tips, the truth spills out. And you smile, sleep tugging at the edges of you, because you know now that truth isn't something to trap or own. It's something to honor, to visit, to carry gently. Maybe tomorrow you'll dream of a new weight, one shaped like a memory you haven't had yet, one that makes you laugh before you understand why. And when you wake, it'll be there, not on your bedside table, but in the way you see the world differently. Slower, softer, brighter, you are enough, balanced as you are, weightless for now, but full of stories and ready for rest. Wherever you are, I'm glad you're here. Let's take one last breath together, slow and deep. Now let the world fade gently behind you. Let silence fill the room like warm night air. And let sleep carry you, light as gold dust, wherever you need to go.